Good evening, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, staff. I see that we have quorum, and I call this planning meeting under the Planning Act for Tuesday, July 3rd, 2018 to order. We'll begin with the adoption of the agenda and then move into our various public meetings. We appreciate your presence here this evening. We do have three matters that we'll be hearing from the public on, and also hearing from staff with staff presentations. As I stated, there is a sign-up sheet over here, and I see that many members of the public have signed it, so thank you very much. So I'll begin with the adoption of the agenda. It has been moved by Councillor Lane that the agenda for the July 3rd, 2018 public meeting under the Planning Act, special meeting of the Committee of the Whole, be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. The next item is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. That is any conflicts of interest that members of council may have. Do any members have any conflicts that they need to disclose?
None, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and I have none. Thank you. So we're going to move into the first item under the Planning Report and Planning Act. It's an application from Dahan Homes at 190 Camborough Road. I have a notice requirement that I'm required to read, and it goes as follows. This is a notice requirement for the zoning bylaw and draft plan of condominium 190 Camborough Road, file numbers AM0218 and 26CD19-02018. The Planning Act require, a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of condominium to permit the use of the property for 14 block townhouse dwellings with associated road, driveway, parking, and landscaping areas. The Planning Act requires under Section 34 and 51 that council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect of a proposed zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of condominium. This public meeting has been called to satisfy this requirement. We are advised that notice of this meeting was provided by prepaid first-class mail to all persons who are listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 120 meters of the subject property, and that was mailed on June 13th, 2018. The notice provided information on the property and the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and the draft plan of condominium. In addition to providing information, which staff and the applicant will do, council will also receive any comments from any member of the public that may wish to offer them. There is, as I mentioned, an attendance list on the table, which we would ask all present to print their name and complete mailing address if they wish to be notified of a decision by council should that occur. If a person or public body would otherwise have the ability to appeal the decision of the town of Pelham to the local planning appeal tribunal, that used to be known as the Ontario Municipal Board, and they've changed that. So if they had the ability to appeal the decision of the town of Pelham to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Pelham before a bylaw is passed, the person, public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. In closing, we stress at this point that no decision has been made on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment or draft plan of condominium, and therefore any comments received will be taken into account by council in their consideration. So first we have a presentation by planning staff, and Ms. Wiens will join us here at the podium and present to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Member, members of council and the public. I'm here this evening to present some information with regards to the applications before you this evening for 190 Canberra Road, and specifically this is for a draft plan of subdivision, or pardon me, draft plan of condominium and a zoning bylaw amendment.
Yes. Excuse me, Mr. Thompson, would you mind just trying to dim the lights here so that the public can see that a bit better? If you wouldn't mind. There's three switches there, and one of them dims them. Thank you very much. Sorry, Ms. Wiens.
It's okay.
There we go. Thank you very much, Curtis. Ms. Wiens, thank you.
So the property is located at 190 Canberra Road in Font Hill. It is 0.748 hectares in area, or just 1.85 acres in area. It's identified on the aerial photography on the PowerPoint in red. The proposal is for 14-unit development, service from a private condominium roadway, internal roadway that will provide individual driveway access to the development. So the property is on the south side of Canberra Road, west of Oak Ridge Boulevard. It is in the urban area of Fonthill. Oops, sorry. So just with respect to some of the background on this property and the history of this property, the property currently does contain an existing single detached dwelling. It is vacant, and we have issued a demolition permit for that dwelling. The property was subject to a consent application and received provisional consent approval in January of 2017. And one of the conditions of consent approval was that they enter into a development agreement. That development agreement was entered into and approved by council in December of 2017, and the consent was finalized this past January. So the parcel has now been created, and as part of that, there was also road widening that the town requested along Canberra Road, and that land has been dedicated to the town for road widening purposes. In May, we received applications for zoning bylaw and draft plan approval. Those applications have been circulated to town departments and commenting agencies. And the last round of kind of commenting that we want to have an input is the public meeting, and so that's why we're here this evening, is the public meeting to receive input from the public on this application. Following this public meeting, there will be a further report prepared for council's consideration, which will contain a recommendation. This plan before you is the proposed draft plan of condominium, and so you can see the proposed layout, the internal roadway that's being proposed to provide access, and so the individual driveway accesses to the proposed 14 units will be off of this internal roadway. Each unit will have a 2-car garage and a double-wide driveway. And in addition, there are 8 visitor parking spaces also proposed. Each of the units will have covered rear decks, providing for rear cover amenity area in addition to rear yard area. And the 2 units fronting and facing on Canberra Road will have facade treatments to provide for an appropriate streetscape and public realm along Canberra Road. This is the proposed streetscape plan for those 2 units. So this is what you would see from Canberra Road. And you can see that the architecture is, and the facade of these 2 units is fairly well articulated, provided different relief to activate the Canberra Road frontage. There's a number of windows also proposed to provide, again, some interest and to break up the facade. Their area will be well landscaped with high-quality landscape materials. There's a sort of an entrance gate feature that will be composed of a stone wall and some landscaping treatments, and some stone pillars with wrought iron fencing along the frontage. With respect to provincial policies, the lands are located within a settlement area as determined by the provincial policy statement. This is an area where the development is to be focused. In terms of new development, is to be focused within our settlement areas, and it's also to provide for intensification with the goal of achieving complete communities. It is also within the Greenbelt Plan. It is not within the Greenbelt Plan or the Niagara Escarpment Plan, so those 2 plans do not apply to this area. However, the growth plan does, and it is also designated within the built-up area of the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And again, this plan is consistent with the provincial policy statement that directs development to our urban areas to provide for development that will achieve complete communities. The lands are designated built-up area in the regional official plan. This is consistent with the provincial policies. And again, the focus of the built-up area designation is to direct new development and intensification to the built-up areas. And within the town's official plan, the lands are designated urban living area built boundary. And it is also within an area that's been identified as having a highly vulnerable aquifer. The land uses that are permitted in the urban living built-up boundary include the full range of residential uses, including single detached, semi-detached townhouses and apartment units. The presence of the highly vulnerable aquifer is to restrict certain types of land uses that would have the potential to harm that aquifer, and in this case, the residential uses are considered to be appropriate in the highly vulnerable aquifer. The property is currently zoned residential R1. That zoning permits single detached dwellings. The proposal is to rezone the properties for a site-specific residential multiple one zone to allow block townhouse development within a draft plan of condominium. So this chart identifies the site-specific zoning exceptions that are being requested by the applicant. I note that these exceptions are not out of the ordinary. We have approved in the past similar types of exceptions in other areas of the development, and they reflect more of a contemporary development standard than what our current bylaw does provide for. For example, it provides for the minimum front yard of 3 meters, and in this case, the front yard is the Canberra Road frontage, and it is asking for a reduction to 3 meters. This front yard, although it's defined as the legal front yard, will function as a side yard because it's the side of the units that are on Canberra Road. And then we see changes to the minimum side yard on the east and west side, and that's to provide for larger yards which will function as the rear yards for these dwellings. And then the rear yard, which is the back that backs onto the ravine, has a 7.5 meter setback. And that's a setback that is required by the Conservation Authority with respect to the top of bank issue. With respect to the public and agency comments that we have received to date, Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority has no objections. They do have some conditions that they would want included. Those conditions relate to the installation of a silt fence during construction and a permanent fence along the edge of the top of bank to protect the valley land that's on the other side. The Niagara region has no objections, again, subject to their conditions with respect to development. Their conditions relate to such matters as having appropriate ability for turning movements for garbage delivery and pickup, as well as the appropriate servicing connections that are required to service the site. Utilities, Enbridge, Hydro One, Bell Canada, and Canada Post, they all have no objections. Fire services, they have no objections, subject to meeting the Ontario Building Code and Fire Code requirements for hydrants and fire route widths and turning radius. Pardon me, in discussions with the fire chief this afternoon, he's indicated that there will be the requirement for a hydrant along the Canberra Road frontage. And my understanding is he's had some discussions with the applicant with respect to that. The building department has no concerns. Of course, they will be subject to the appropriate building permit approvals at the time of construction. We have received, prior to the finalization of the agenda for this public meeting, we did receive comments from Bill Gibson. He's indicated opposition to the development, expressed some concerns regarding privacy, views, restricted sunlight, potential for flooding and wind block, the negatively with respect to snow accumulation, light pollution, impact that the wildlife may have, and the past property standard issues. And he's indicated that he feels a committee should be formed to oversee construction if the development is approved. So in conclusion, that gives an overview of the proposed applications and the policy framework in which those are being considered. The proposal is for a condominium development for 14 units. No recommendations are being made at this point in time, and no decision will be made at this evening. We appreciate the ability to present this information and to have public input and feedback. Any comments should be forwarded to Shannon Larocque. She's the planner of record on this file, and if not to Shannon, then to myself, and either her or I would be happy to receive the comments and respond accordingly. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Are there any questions from members of council that might clarify something that the director has indicated? There will be a time, of course, later for councillors to provide input. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to the applicant. If the applicant or his agent might have a presentation and want to give additional information to council, we'll hear from the applicant now. And if you could give us your name and the firm you represent, etc., so that we can have it for the record.
Absolutely.
It's on the screen, I see, but
yes, we're up there. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and neighbors in attendance tonight. That is a really thorough overview by town staff, so I'm going to try to expedite this a little bit, be respectful of everyone's time tonight. We know what the application's about, but again, here's the subject lands, just a little bit of a different perspective on it. You can see Canberra Roads to the north, Oak Ridge Boulevard with the homes backing onto the site. Then we have the ravine with the stormwater drainage easement, and then Concord Street. There is a dwelling immediately to the west, and then on the other side is actually our applicant, Mr. DeHaan, is currently building his home on the other side of that. Going to the consent that was spoke about by town staff, this is just one of the sketches that came out of that approval. You can see part 2. This line being established as part of the top of bank because of the slope stability issues with the ravine. And again, all these lands here are owned by Mr. DeHaan, and this is the location of his new home there. Our applications are for zoning bylaw amendment tonight, and with site-specific provisions. As we heard from town staff, generally the provisions that we're asking for tonight are quite minor, and typically, in our opinion, would have been addressed through a minor variance. But because we're bringing a different housing form that's not a single detached dwelling, the zoning's appropriate. So although it is a rezoning, in our opinion, this is more of a minor application because we're adding that additional use in there. The draft plan of condominium, again, it'll be 14 residential townhomes is how they're being classified. In actuality, if I can just bring up a drawing here, you can see here that these are in fact almost similar to a semi-detached, and then we have the 3 blocks here of townhomes together. So these are 2 units, 2, 2, 2, and then 3 and 3 just for context. Excuse me. We've already talked about the zoning change and the things that are requested. One of the things that we have heard is a question about amenity area. It's a requirement of the town's official plan that private road developments do provide some sort of public space. As we're creating conveyable lots for private ownership, we've asked to have that omitted because these are people's backyards and they have a common amenity that the condo corporation takes care of, they maintain, and they can enjoy together. This is just an approximate location of some of those, we'll call them variances that we're asking for, site-specific, just for the rear yard setbacks and the side yards, as well as our front yard setback. Here we're ensuring that the front door of the dwelling is closer to the road and that the garage is stepped back. It's good urban design, and it makes the house more prominent on the street level. Again, just to build upon what town staff said about Canberra Road, through this development, our client is really he wants to ensure that the character of Canberra Road is upheld. The homes that DeHaan Homes build are premium, and they'll definitely contribute to a great streetscape along Canberra Road and kind of blend the urban and the rural mix, as you can see by some of the planned landscaping along the front and the wrought iron fence. It's going to be a great addition to the street, and we've also had the road allowance that's been conveyed through the consent applications, so it's an opportunity for the town to build further upon that if there's an opportunity for sidewalks or active transportation on the road. These are all elements where the private development can work in concert with the rest of the greater neighborhood. One of the things that wasn't touched upon, and this is probably a little bit of new information, Upper Canada Consulting with DeHaan Homes, we held an open house on our own at the Masonic Lodge on Hay Street. We sent out circulation to all the immediate neighbors in the area, invited them to come in, take a look at the display boards, show them the houses that were being proposed, what the plans look like. We gave a brief overview of the applications and what we were asking for, and provide an opportunity for everybody to shuffle in, take a look at the drawings, ask staff, or ask the consulting team if they had any specific questions. Some of the things we did here were about sewer connections. This is going to be a low pressure sewage system. I have Jason Schooley here also from Upper Canada. He's a professional engineer. I anticipate that we're going to have some questions about how the sanitary system is handled for this, because the sanitary does need to be extended down Canberra Road to connect to this. Stormwater management, we heard some concerns about water runoff going down into the easement behind the property at the bottom of the ravine. Community mailboxes as well. We have confirmed through Canada Post that there will be a brand new box that serves the development on its own. Access to the easement for maintenance, what the parking is going to look like, what sort of fencing is going to interface between the privately owned homes as well as the existing dwellings that are there, as well as emergency access in case of an event. How can the trucks get in? Can we prove they can get in? Is there sufficient firefighting capability, emergency access, things like that. In terms of the next steps, consideration of the draft approval of this application will be coming forward along with the zoning bylaw amendment which can implement it. From that point, if it's approved, we'll move into the site plan process where we'll handle all the detailed design which revolves around the servicing, access, the height of the buildings, the facades, what everything's going to look like, and the landscaping. As that comes forward, it'll merge up with the end when we'll execute the site plan agreement, and then we'll register the vacant land condominium. And once that's done, construction can begin on the new development. So again, this is just the drawing we have here. We have taken a look at the presentation that's being provided tonight. We do understand there's some opposition, and we would just respectfully ask that we have an opportunity to respond to any of those questions or to provide any clarity if appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions to the, before you run away, any questions to the applicant's agent?
No.
I have a couple of questions.
Certainly.
The width of that roadway, the road width, the condominium road, it doesn't appear on in the document that I have.
Oh, it's 7 meters wide
7 meters?
down through here, and this is where it becomes 6 meters, and that speaks to the question that we had from fire about the requirements of the town for emergency access.
Okay,
So we're working with them to demonstrate that there's fire hydrant capacity and that we can turn a truck around in there.
okay, thank you. And why 14 units?
It's what fit the most appropriately in there. We felt it leads to a good design and a good articulation. Certainly, it helps meet the growth objectives of the town, and it does
I think it's more the province, not the town, but.
Oh, yeah. Well. Also, one thing that we'd like to point out, though, is too, although it is 14 units, the relationship between the amount of lots on Oak Ridge, here we have 6 lots, backing onto 5 units. So we actually aren't even 1 for 1 there. So we're trying to respect that interface as well.
Okay. Those are all my questions at this
Okay.
time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Now we'll open it up for public input. We did have one member of the public who made a pretty put forward a pretty detailed presentation. I would actually ask him to come forward first, and then I'll open it up to other members of the public. Sometimes I doubt if it'll happen tonight, but sometimes it's a bit awkward because there's a situation where somebody might make a presentation or have a question, and then the applicant or his agent will want to respond, and then you almost get into a conversation between the individuals, and that's kind of sometimes emotions get elevated, etc. So in order to stop that and try to prevent that from happening, what I would ask is that if there are questions from the public or answers provided by the applicant, that it comes through me as chair to try to make sure that it's all kind of level and not a back and a forth, because we may get in a situation where Mr. Gibson might ask a question and then the applicant will be standing right next to him, and so just so that it's run that way, if it just can come through the chair, just so that we kind of keep it a level field, okay? It may not be for this file, it may be for other files, or it may not even happen tonight, but just based on experience, it's our best practice. So, Mr. Gibson, thank you for your patience, and please proceed.
Mr. Chair, Council. First of all, Mr. DeHaan, I am not against the development of your property. Okay, I want you to understand.
Okay,
that.
I'd ask you to, again, direct it to the chair.
Okay. It's the, as presented, the proposal as presented, I think there is some potential problems that could impact the neighbors. I live at 34 Oak Ridge Boulevard. Most of us, there's quite a number of us here, have been there for 20 years, and I have, in my presentation, I have talked to many of the people that are going to back onto this development, and most of us are not opposed to the development. It's just the density and the type of structures. Okay?
Thank you.
So, starting with the neighborhood permit, that perimeters, this proposed development is composed of bungalows, standalone single residential structures. It's not high density, more akin to Toronto, Mississauga, or Etobicoke as proposed. And for the residents that abut the eastern face of the proposed development, their properties have been have very detailed gardens that afford a cool place in the summer and a pleasant view and privacy. In proposing this development with its two-floor structures and high-density footprint, this development, in my opinion, will alter the single residential character of our Graceville neighborhood. It'll deprive us of our privacy, a pleasant view, and cast a structural shadow on our gardens, etc. And it will significantly degrade the value and enjoyment of our backyard experience. I have some background in construction, and so what I did was this slide right here is to present to you why some of our concerns are put forward. This is a cross section. The structure, or the line over on the right hand side is the existing it's the existing level that is of the property right now. And Mr. DeHaan's representative at the open house indicated that they would step and follow that grading to some extent. However, the properties adjacent to it on the east hand side are the lines that are represented on the left hand of the vertical property line. And up at Canberra, they're about 12 inches below grade. The next house is between 16 and 20. My wife and I's yard are between 40 and 48 inches lower. Next door is 36 to 60. And then you get down to about plus 60 inches, which will be down level with the bottom of the townhouses that will be facing onto the back of the ravine. So the backyards of all the properties on Oak Ridge are lower than the existing grade of the proposed development property. In my opinion, it presents 6 possible negative scenarios to our properties if this proposal is approved. What I've done here, to the best of my ability, is to draw this to scale. I'm basing this on the presentation that you saw on the Canberra Road one as to heights. I do have some experience in building houses and that, so I'm trying not to present something here that is not real, but from what I've seen publicly so far, I present it, and this is a cross section. The dark building on the other side, this is to scale, the best I can draw with it. Each one of those little bars is 4 feet. As the gentleman from Upper Canada presented, the backyard from the property line where the dip is right there, the backyards are going to be about 7.55 meters away from our property line, and the edge of the deck, according to the drawings that I've seen, is about 6.11 meters. I've put a scale person there. That person is 6'6", just a little under 6 feet. In scale, and what I've done on the gray side is there's some bungalows there that are adjacent to either side of the property, and you can see that their top of their foundation is about 2 feet off of that low level grade. Then you got the first floor, which is 3.2 above the grade, and then 11.2, and then 16.2, and then on the right hand side I've shown you approximately. Now I don't have a set of architectural drawings. I'm just going by what was presented at the public meeting. So you can see that these buildings are a 2-level building, and they are going to be significantly higher than our bungalows. The first concern we're having is our privacy. There's a mannequin standing on the porch as proposed on the left-hand side, and as you can see, our backyards are pretty well open for view, and our head level will be about the same level as the proposed decks. Most of our yards have been in summer, or been very sunny. I did some calculations based upon my experience with MTO and a few other, the Ontario Realty Corp. So in the afternoons, we're going to be basically after about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe a little later, depending on what time of the year. That's August 1st sunline. So about midsummer, we're going to be in shadow, and midwinter, by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to be in shadow as well. This will have negative effects on our plants and some of our flowers and stuff. I talked at length with the representative from Upper Canada, and we were talking about drainage and that sort of thing, but you can do your best. I mean, I've developed properties, and you can do your best, put swales in and everything else, but if you get a freak rainstorm, which we have had a couple of weeks, the potential for that water, especially during the spring if there's blockages, could cascade down into our properties. Also of note that the building code requires that there be positive drainage around from any new structure, so you know, you've got a slope somewhere or another. Maybe there's another solution that I haven't seen, but it hasn't been expressed publicly to us yet. Our backyards are, we face west, and we enjoy, this weekend was quite nice. We enjoyed a very nice breeze. The buildings as presented will prevent that breeze from coming into our yards, or it will block to a certain extent. Our back porch is about 4 feet off the ground, 5 feet, and we can sit out there with a nice breeze. I think the 2-story structures are going to limit that breeze to our house, and also we designed the house so the breeze air conditions the home, so we're going to be turning our air conditioners on a little sooner than later. I consulted with a friend of mine from MTO, and we talked about the negative lee and snowstorm. And as you're all aware, the wind comes in normally from the west during a snowstorm, and so we're going to basically pick up the lee. And that lee snow is usually about 10 to 15% denser than a regular snowfall because of the cascading effect. And so we're going to get a bit more snow in our yards. And as I showed you on the second slide, we all drain downhill to the Ridgeville drain at the bottom of the hill, so we're going to get more runoff. This is my backyard, and as the gentleman from Upper Canada pointed out, these are kind of detached, space detached. The 2 red lines are my property lines, and I'm going to be looking at 2 decks out my backyard. And if I'm standing on my backyard, that green space in scale is the same scale as the other ones, and that's 4 feet. So basically, I lost my view. So the view on the top right-hand corner is me looking up towards Canberra, and the view on the other side is looking down towards the Ridgeville ditch, or ravine, or drainage, or whatever. Further down, there is, I think, 2 groups of 3 houses joined together that will be on the ravine. Those properties, you can see the edge of the structure is actually closer than up the hill. At least this is the drawing that I've seen publicly. So again, I've replicated the top of our roof and the person standing. Now, you'll notice that the difference between the finished grade on the structure and the finished grade on the existing structure is lower, because those properties are all about 60 inches or more lower than the existing. Now, the green line on the finish on the existing or the new structures is what's there right now. So if there's any change in elevation, it could be exaggerated, it might be dropped, I don't know. I'm only working with the drawings I've seen. So all of the aforementioned around the privacy, the shade, the lack of breeze, the wind lee, etc., is going to be more acute for these people, because the houses or the new structures are actually going to be closer to their property lines, and all of their properties are significantly lower as you go down the hill. There's an internal road. The people next to me and the person on the next one, this is what they're going to be looking at that internal road. They're going to have cars driving along there. The green space represents 60 inches of difference. So there's my friend standing there. You're going to have cars, you're going to have noise, you're going to have light pollution from the overhead lighting in the street. Also, those yards are very private right now, and with the road coming in and the T-shape of it, there's going to be uncontrolled public access to the back of these people's fences. And also, that's their view right now, and that's what they're going to be looking at now. It'll be an urban setting. As the Director of Planning mentioned, we have grown very used to having a great deal of wildlife there. We have turkeys come up. We feed them during the winter. We have all sorts of other animals. At the public presentation, they were talking that they were going to fence off the back of the ravine. So this will prevent some of the bigger animals coming up. We even have raccoons, and we have the odd raptor coming in, and we even have coyotes coming up along the fence line, which is kind of interesting. I'm of the opinion that the concerns and comfort enjoyment of our neighbor properties has not been taken into consideration with this proposal. This is what we're looking at right now. This is based on my very negative experience with the developer and some of the town's administration, and I apologize, but that's the way it was. Since the property has been developed, it's really become quite a blight to our community. And I only bring this up because later on I'm going to propose that if this development is giving the go-ahead, that the committee be formed with the neighbors and the developer, so that we can enjoy our backyards while the construction is going on. These are pictures from my backyard that I looked at for 3 summers. And I won't go into it too much, but I think the picture's pretty well worth. And I approached the developer and didn't get a response back. I went to your bylaw people, and I got pushback from them. And gradually, I got fed up. So I went to the OMB, and I worked for the Ontario government for 36 years, and I went to a friend of mine at the OMB, and finally I went to your bylaw people and said, if you don't do something about this, I'm going to phone the OMB. So they issued a comply order. Mr. DeHaan, under the Landlord and Tenant Act, probably had some problems objecting this person. But anyway, the tenant stormed onto my property after the bylaw was issued and threatened me and my wife, and included he was going to run around town that I was a pedophile. He blew grass clippings from his commercial lawnmower onto my property. He power washed all his equipment, blew it onto my property. We were cleaning our hot tub, so he decided to cut some stones, and all the dust blew in there. And every time there was an incident, I let the town bylaw officer know and the developer. And if there was anything done, it was pretty ineffective because my wife and I lost the use of our backyard for a whole summer. We could not go out there without being yelled, cursed at, stuffed, all crap. I bring this up because this is my closing remarks. I'm against the development of the property as proposed, including but not limited to the preceding slides. I'm not against the development, it's just the concept of these large blocks of buildings behind us. Given my history with the developer and the town administration, I do not have any confidence that our well-being will be taken into account during construction or it might be enforced. I am proposing that the development as presented be declined, that when the property is being developed, that there be a committee between the developer and representatives of the community so that we can basically mitigate any disruption and inconvenience to our surrounding, because this is a very tight site, and if those 14 buildings are going to be in place, it's going to be quite an active site, and there's going to be a lot of dirt and stuff. If the property is developed, we would like a variance on our fences so that we can maintain our privacy. I am concerned vis-a-vis the town and the developer being in a conflict of interest, Mr. Chair. The town has been receiving goods and services, or goods in kind, from the developer for the last year and a half. The town has been using the site to simulate fire drills. The regional police force has been using the site to simulate police invasions of homes. And about 3 weeks ago, I was in the backyard, and all of a sudden 4 Buffalo police vehicles showed up, completely armed and with dogs, and it was quite discerning that all of a sudden I got a police simulation going on in our backyard. So the town itself will have to look at it being that you have been receiving goods or services in kind. I checked the Municipal Act, and I think you would have to take that into consideration before you approve this development issue. And I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gibson, for your comprehensive presentation. We appreciate it. Just a second, please. There may be members of council with a question. There may not be, but there may be, again, very comprehensive, but there may be questions from councillors. Councillor King.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Gibson with regards to the comment related to forming an oversight construction or an oversight committee. And my question is this: if this plan were approved, what would be the expectation of that committee?
Well, can I just give you a little anecdotal? When I was building houses in Kingston, we developed the site and we also built. We had to dynamite every inch of it, okay? And I had, the first project I did for the company was similar to this. We were in an enclosed area. So we formed a committee to let everybody know what we were doing because we were dynamiting. And down there, you cannot pour a basement. They're all block basements. So we had to work with everybody, and that's where I kind of got the idea from. It's been a very frustrating 4 years with this property deteriorating as it was. So I thought that if Mr. DeHaan or the developer would like to show good faith, this is then we would, the community would like to have a meeting with them to say, okay, what's going on next and what mitigation we'd be doing, and if there's something maybe we can negotiate. This is a very dense construction site, as you can imagine, with those townhouses going in like that. You will have to excavate at least 4 feet beyond what the perimeter of that building is. So the backyards are going to get, it's going to be very close to our backyards. It's all sand. The wind blows from the west. we're concerned. And this, our information from the public meeting was that in April, they plan to start the development. So most of the heavy stuff will be May, June, July, and August, probably. And most of us have, we have swimming pools, we have hot tubs in our backyard, and that type of thing. So, and we do, and we do enjoy our backyards, and this is going to be quite a strain on us for a period of time.
Okay.
And also, I'm not too happy about what's gone on in the last 4 years, as you can all appreciate.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thanks very much. Any other questions for Mr. Gibson? The fence, you're suggesting a variance on the fencing. That is what, to extend the height to a higher amount to help mitigate some of those factors that you spoke about?
Yeah, I appreciate you don't want a 12-foot fence there, but if you go back and
let me ask it this way: do many or most of the properties have a
Yeah.
fence? Do they not?
if you want some way of, I mean, the properties, I mean, that's my property at 40-some-odd inches to 48 inches. So I'm going to be standing almost at foot level to people looking at me, okay? It gets worse as you go down the hill. So there's one of my neighbors has invested a huge amount of money in his backyard, has swimming pool, entertains quite consistently. They're going to be at the end of that street. So any activities they have in the backyard are going to be completely lost as far as any privacy is concerned. So if there's a variance for the developer, then maybe we can work with your planning department and get a variance on maybe some screening and stuff that we could regain privacy.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you very much. Appreciate
thank
that.
you.
Anything further?
But, sir, I want to remind you and to Mr. DeHaan that we are not against the development of that property. It's just, I mean, if there was some changes made to it, I'm sure that the neighbors would be glad to reconsider this if it was maybe not quite as dense. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Gibson. Appreciate your presentation and your feedback. Now I open the floor to other members of the public. If there's anyone else that would like to present. Going once? Anyone? If you would like to come up, what we're doing is we're recording this meeting. So I would ask that you come up to the podium, and then the mic will catch what you're saying, and we would ask that you say your name and address, and then provide information, and the clerk will type it up, and it'll be on the video. So if you don't mind just coming up to the podium. Ma'am? Thank you so much.
My name's Nora Pete. We live at 193 Canberra Road, which is right across the street, and have been there since 1953. I want to commend Mr. Gibson for his very thorough assessment. I note that most of his objections speak to how the houses that will back onto the property are affected, and I have no objection to that. I have some more general comments which I think are worthy of note. First of all, I think that to put 14 fairly big townhouses on that property is excessive. As he says, we have all known that it would be developed for some time. I think this is an inappropriate development. One of the problems I see is that I think it will create a traffic hazard. When you are driving up Canberra Road from Bridgeville, that property is pretty much at the top of the rise. You cannot see the entrance to that property, where the road would be, until you get over the rise, which is only like one house down. I think it will be a really serious traffic problem. You already have traffic going way too fast on that road. Secondly, the issue of drainage. There's clearly going to be an issue of drainage into the backyards, as we saw with the relative heights of the property. The issue that I think has not been addressed is the drainage over the back into the gully. I'll tell you our experience on the north side of Canberra Road. A good many years ago, probably in the 70s, developments were made on Highway 20, and that would be, before Massimo's was done farther east, and subsequent ones have been made up and down that stretch. At the time, there was a lot of concern because with paving, you get runoff, and as Mr. Gibson pointed out, all of these properties are hills of sand and nothing else. And whereas some drainage was installed at that time, for the last 20 or 30 years, there has been nothing but torrents of water coming down the side of the gullies on the north side of Canberra, between Highway 20 and Canberra, and literally ripping out the cane. Mm-hmm. I could take you down to our back 40. The sand down there is probably this deep over just a few years. It has buried the fertile topsoil, and it has ripped out acres from the hills behind Highway 20. There is no question in my mind, and by the way, repeated appeals to the town to remedy this have done no good. The sand from there has washed across 3 or 4 properties, and this is all land that drains into the Ridgeville Drain. So I think you're going to find that there's a drainage problem on the south side of Canberra Road behind this development, where there is a protected area. It's not very well protected if there is that much paving invariably leads to that much runoff. And we know that we're being encouraged to not cover land that will absorb water with concrete and buildings to this degree of intensity. I will also point out that underneath all of this land is a really critical aquifer, and we know that the water level in that aquifer has dropped over the last 30 years. And I can't give you the details. I can certainly forward them to you, but we know that has happened, so that where there has been development, you don't get the water percolating down through the soil to the water table. The third thing I think is pretty critical to mention is, as Mr. Gibson pointed out, the wildlife corridor. There has been a real restoration of wildlife in that area in the 65 or 70 years that I personally have been on that property. And part of the reason that the corridor exists is because you can maintain open and wooded areas right from Highway 20 down through Effingham and across Canberra Road again down through Effingham Road and right down into Wainfleet. And I think it would be important to maintain that wildlife corridor. There are some species, as he pointed out, that have returned to the area, like bluebirds. There were never bluebirds here, and they have been seen in the last few years. But I think it would be important to maintain that corridor, and one of the ways that might be done is to reduce the number of buildings that are being put on that property. Now, I may be wrong. I think I gathered from something that you said, sir, that if this property belongs to you, that you're building a house on the other side of the,
Okay, through the chair, if you don't mind.
well, I gather that the developer is building a house for himself on the other side of the sort of other side of the U. And I am not sure that I appreciate that he wants to have a big space for one house, but he wants to put 14 houses on this other space.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. The council had any questions for Mrs. Pete? Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to present? And I invite you, please come up to the podium and state your name and address so we have it for the record.
Very brief.
Oh, okay.
24 Oak Ridge Boulevard.
Okay, thank
My name
you.
is Ron Masco. I've been there 21 years. I like to do a lot of gardening, and my experience with the sandy soil has just opened my eyes to drainage and trying to keep that sandy soil together. So when I see that property going up, red flags go up in my mind. The sandy soil will cause a brief period of construction with dust blowing around. We had that 21 years ago. All the caulking around all my windows are all yellow. So I don't imagine what's going to happen to people's pools, but that's another story. But the drainage is the number one concern of mine. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Masco. Any questions for? No. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please, and your name and address, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Grace Bodway, and my husband and I reside of the property of 26 Oak Ridge Boulevard. The one thing that has not been addressed by anybody else here, and I'm not as well learned as my previous commentator.
No problem. We don't bite.
I am concerned that there is nothing at the back of this property to the south. Nothing has been said about it. Now, where we are on 26 Oak Ridge, we own, or shall I say the property that we have contains the gabion.
In which?
Are you familiar? Is anybody familiar with that, the gabion at the back of our property? Okay. When we first moved in, Mrs. Hayes' grandkids would come running along the gabion. Well, of course, it's on our property. If they fell over the 8 foot into the rocks, it would be our responsibility. So I want to make sure that that area at the back of this new development is going to be gated and fenced properly so that those people and their grandkids and their animals or pets or whatever are not going to be coming onto our property at the back, which contains the gabion. And of course, there is also the drainage properties from these back properties that is probably going to erode the back of this easement, the north side of the easement, and everything is going to just collapse. And as mentioned before, we have had an awful lot of wildlife in the back. We have had deer, bucks. We have one year had a fox who had a litter, and that was very interesting for us. So we're not going to be getting all of this wildlife, and especially if we do not have a fence that is going to keep them north, and they are not going to be intruding on the gabion, the easement side of the property, then it's going to be a little bit better for those of us. My neighbor to the north also has part of that back, but they do not have the gabion as we have that is right across the back of our property.
So just for clarity, it's a, I think they're gabion baskets, is that correct? They're like rocks in a fenced piece, is that what you're describing? Right, right. It's not an animal, it's a structure, it's a rock structure, just for counselors that may not be familiar with that term.
Oh, the gabion?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yes, yes. Did you explain it a little better, did you, Rod? Probably Bill can do a better job because he's so well prepared, and I have not been. But I am concerned that
Okay.
there is nothing there to keep the traffic coming down that gabion and onto, well, the easement and onto our property.
Okay,
In fact, one of Mrs. Hayes' grandkids did come to our property at the back and cut down a little Christmas tree, a little fir tree that we had. I guess gave it to her for Christmas because there is no line at the back of our property to show that that is where it ends, okay?
Okay.
We have all the forestry area, the easement at the back. Okay.
thank you very much, appreciate it, thank you. I don't know if any members of council have any questions, they're, okay. Thank you so much, Mrs. Baudouin, for your presentation. Other members of the public, please, sir, come up. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see you there, over here off to the side. Go ahead.
in the good chair. Hi, my name's Charles Garner. I live at 32 Oak Ridge Boulevard. My wife and I just moved in 7 weeks ago. And we came from just outside of Brampton in Caledon East. And we came down to this area and liked the way Fonthill was laid out. The whole area, the aesthetics, the buildings, the flow, some green spaces, and everything. And when we moved in and we saw the space behind us, being from where we came from, we know that every little parcel of green land at some point is going to have housing put on it because that's the way of the world, and we understand that. And the first thing we said was, that's not a problem because we know that's how it's going to happen. And if they wound up in our heads, we said, you put half a dozen, 8 nice houses back in that area, it'll look the same as the rest of the area. And that's kind of what we just thought about. And then we went on about unpacking boxes and not really being concerned about the space behind. And then when we saw the layout and everything, it was all of a sudden it brought back, boy, you have a little piece of land, let's jam as much as we possibly can. And while we're at it, how about a couple of, high-rise 40 or 50-story buildings? We should be able to find a place to jam that in there too. And that's just the way it struck us, rather than keeping the overall picturesque, aesthetic feeling of the whole area, right? So as Mr. Gibson said, we knew something would be going in there. We just thought it would be a little more like the surrounding areas of, the houses on Oak Ridge or Canberra or whatever. So just to say, we're new here, so that's our 2 cents from, as an outsider just coming in and moving into the area.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation, Mr. Garner. Welcome to town. Any other members of the public that would like to present? Would you mind just coming up so we can capture this on video as well? Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that, and folks getting up and allowing them to come through. And your name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Murray Downey. I live at 10 Michaela Crescent. And when you were talking earlier, I think Ms. Wynn indicated that it's acceptable to build housing.
Excuse me, please. Sorry, it's difficult to hear. Thank you very much, Mr.
I believe
Downey.
Ms. Wynn indicated earlier that it's acceptable to build housing on the highly vulnerable aquifer. And I'm not so sure it is, because I noticed in the last year there's been a marked deterioration in the water in Draper's Creek. That's a little creek that flows in through Harrow Black. Mm-hmm. Last winter it was covered in slime. I've never, in the 17 years I've lived there, it's never been like that. And even now it's got a greeny blue sheen in the water. It was never like that. So I don't know, I can't say for sure because I can't study the water or the aquifer, but all the development on north of the fire station, like it's all on the same kind of fill. So if that, just whether fertilizer or other things that are washing into the aquifer, and it's starting to show up now in Draper's Creek.
Okay.
So it might be something to consider before you allow any more development on the highly vulnerable aquifer.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Downey, appreciate that. Any questions for Mr. Downey at this point? Okay, thank you. Any other members of the public? Okay, please come forward and mind the chairs there, thank you.
I'm Colin Vanderploeg at 36 Oak Ridge Boulevard.
Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate that it's not just Bill Gibson's thing. We're kind of all have talked about this as neighbors along that stretch. And again, waiting for something to develop there other than what's sitting there. And wondering, I think it would be a win-win situation if there was some coming together with the neighbors, with the developer. That also helps the future residents who move into these places. Nothing worse than moving into a place in which all the neighbors behind you hate your building already.
Right.
We want to build healthy neighborhoods, so healthy communities. So I would not like I'm not in favor of the presently presented density. I think there needs to be some thought into that. I would rather see probably, like I say, something more in keeping with the surrounding housing, at least on that side of Canberra. And so that's kind of where we're coming from as well.
Okay, thank you. And there might be questions. Were you able to attend that
We were not
that
able
meeting?
to attend the
Okay.
presentation, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any others? Going once? Going twice? Don't be shy. Going 3 times? Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your feedback. We certainly appreciate that. And it has been taped and has been typed, and so it is in the record. So thank you very much. And obviously, those things that will have to be considered when council gets to a point of decision and we look at this file. So now, as is on the agenda, we do have an opportunity for committee input. And so, who's going to start off? There might be questions or comments. Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like the fact that the neighborhood community has got together and is united in their thinking. It has been mentioned several times this evening that 14 units is too many. I'm just wondering if, in fact, a suggestion from the neighbors to staff for consideration to see what they think a suitable number would be for developments there. And that would be, again, I know what the developer is looking at 14. I'm looking at what the neighbors think would be acceptable because apparently they don't think 14 is an appropriate number. So just something as a guideline, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but you can go with the follow-up that Ms. Weens has left and bring that to Ms. Weens, because the report will be coming back to council later on. So, and just offer that for,
Okay.
For a suggestion.
Great, thank you very much. Are you looking for?
Not necessarily
from the
tonight, but
applicant,
I'm
or-
looking for some input as to what do you feel is going to be appropriate if 14 isn't.
Okay, so council colleagues, the applicant, what's your name again, sir?
Sorry, it's Craig
Their last name?
Rowe.
Mr. Rowe. So Mr. Rowe is prepared to comment. Do you want to hear that comment?
Absolutely,
Okay.
and certainly after your comments, the people who live around the neighborhood certainly would be welcome to give suggestions. as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity to respond to some of this. We had an opportunity to look at the slide deck, but didn't get really the full breadth of the comments. First thing I'd like to speak to is the density question.
Yeah,
in
and
the
I think with respect, that's the question we're dealing with right now.
Yes.
So
Yes. So with regard to the density question, currently in the town's official plan, the density permitted on the site is between 10 and 25 units per hectare. We're currently at 18.7. So we're actually not over the approved density on the site. And that's with our current configuration based on getting the townhomes in there. And as I noted, some of the adjustments for those buildings are considered minor. So we feel that's an appropriate fit. The size of the units is generally comparable to those that are backed on. The lots are about 40 feet wide, which is comparable to some of the buildings we're seeing in East Font Hill. They're by no means a small GTA-style lot that's going in here.
okay, thank you very much. So there may be other comments from council. So
Yes.
we'll make call on you, Mr. Rowe. Councillor Durley, did you want to follow up and ask
Yeah, no,
staff for clarity
I
on
fully
that?
appreciate, and having heard your presentation, I fully appreciate that you are within the limits that are set out by the OP. It appears that the neighbors feel this might be a bit excessive. I'm just looking for some input as to what they think might be able to be there.
Thank
Not
you.
saying that it's going to be law, but in fact, if you're meeting the criteria, then that's good, but I would like to see a full cross-section of both sides of the debate coming in as what people think is necessary.
All right, thank you, Councillor. So that's more to the members of the public. If Councillor Durley's saying if you want to provide some feedback to do so to staff. I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Ribiak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions.
Thanks, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you.
The first one I think I'd like to address, if you don't mind, I think it would be most appropriate to go to the Chief Administrative Officer, the CAO.
Okay.
I was really bothered by an inference that was made that things have been happening that sound like they constitute at least the appearance of a conflict of interest that we may have. And I don't know any of the things that Mr. Gibson was referring to. I wonder whether it would be possible for us, not obviously tonight right away, but to have reported out to us, what is it that we're talking about here? The kinds of activities that went on, or whatever it was that have suggested to people that somehow we might not be in a position to be able to make an unbiased decision in this case. That really bothers me, and I'd like to know more about it, and I think it would probably be best
Are you able to help
coming
the
from the
councillor?
CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, generally speaking, I'm not speaking to this case in specifically, but generally speaking, if there is a structure that becomes vacant for whatever reason, it is not uncommon for the owner to contact the fire department and offer that structure for some sort of training purposes prior to its demolition. So that is not an uncommon practice. We don't go and solicit that. We don't benefit in any way from that. It's simply an opportunity for our firefighters to train in a real world setting, if you will, as opposed to a classroom or in a simulated area. As far as other police services go, that's out of our jurisdiction. That wasn't anything to do with the town. So if there was an arrangement made, I would assume that was done with the developer. But I will follow up with the fire chief and find out specifically in this case if that was in fact what happened, which I suspect it was. And if it wasn't, I'll report back to council with what exactly there are. But as far as us doing business with the owner, I'm not aware of any relationship the town would have.
Okay.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Mayor.
much.
And through you, neither am I. I was very surprised to hear that. I was very bothered to hear that. I have a couple of more mundane questions, if you don't mind. One of the things that happened, and this perhaps is to our director of planning, one of the things in the changes was a reduction in a planting strip of 1.5 meters to 0 meters. I take that this is a planting strip that was meant to go between the proposed zoning of this and other zoning types. Can we talk about why that is? Why that was proposed to go to 0? Is that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. So that request was to remove the planting strip because it's going to be people's rear yards. And so there will be landscaped area along there. The landscape plan that was submitted with the application does show landscaping material along there. But because it's a rear yard as opposed to a specified, defined planting strip, the request was to remove that. But it is part of the rear yard, so it's not to say that there wouldn't be any landscape material being placed in those areas. There is, and that's what's proposed, but it's private outdoor amenity area as opposed to a public landscape planting strip.
So, just for clarity, each of these properties they'll be severed and owned by the homeowner, the unit owner, as a condominium, but then there'll be a common condominium space.
The common condominium space and along the rear of those properties. And
Perhaps maybe Mr. Thompson can put that slide up, or you, Ms. Weens, to point out to the councillor. So, councillor, I believe it's the 0 on each of the, are they lots? Is that what we can call them, Ms. Weens? On each of the lots, but in the, there is a common condominium space that appears that may have some landscaping in it.
There we go.
so just along these areas in here and along this side
Yeah, there's,
lines, you would the bylaw requires where you abut an R1 zone to put in a landscape strip.
There's another plan that might show the actual lot lines. That was your presentation.
I've lost it here, sorry.
It's probably under window or something. I don't know.
No, I'm sorry, I've lost it.
Mr. Mayor, you don't need to find it for my benefit. I think I understand what we're talking about. My question really is whether,
There is a common strip along here that will be owned by the condominium corporation. And that's within which there will be landscaping that's proposed on the landscaping plan in the draft plan of condominium.
okay, so my question, Mr. Mayor,
Thank you,
through
Ms.
you,
Means. Go ahead.
the backyards, I think, are described as 7.5 meters, but there's no planting strip of 1.5 meters, and I think we're being told that the 1.5 meters is absorbed in the 7.5 meters that is currently described as the backyard. So the backyard, I guess, is,
It's right there on the side. Right there. Fourth one down?
Yep.
is that the same one?
That's the same one.
No, it's different.
Yes, I see the additional line that's there. You're right.
It's under slideshow, right there.
Yeah.
So the 0 is on the lot line in the back, is that correct, Ms.
Correct.
Means?
On the lot line?
Then there's a common area owned by the condominium, and Ms. Weems will outline the landscaping that will occur
So
there.
in this strip in here, there will be landscaping provided, and along here, and across the front. This is the common area. It's owned by the condominium corporation that maintains these common areas. Along with the road, that is part of the common condominium.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, are we talking about backyards that are 7.5 plus something for the common area? Or is 7.5 inclusive of that common area?
7.5 includes that common area.
Thank you for that. I have a couple of other questions, if I may,
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms.
Mayor.
Weems. Go ahead.
Councillor Durley was talking about the number, and I had a question with regard to the number of buildings that would fit on that lot. I'm just curious to know, and again, I don't know that an answer is available right now because this may require a little bit of research, but I'm wondering if we weren't looking at a site-specific RM, but the normal one, the one that's on the left-hand column as opposed to the one that shows the sizes, how many units would be on the property in that case? And the second question I have with regard to the number is, if the property were subdivided according to the standards the town has for lots, how many lots would there be? So I guess I'm asking, how many units would there be if the land was just subdivided into the maximum number that would fit our plan? The number that would be there if we were dealing with a multiple residence situation that was not site-specific. I wonder if we can get those two numbers just to see what the contrast would be.
Are you able to help the counselor now, or can you get that
Mr. Mayor, through
information?
you, if it were a townhouse development that met the RM1 zone, it would be something less than 14 units. You could potentially get 14 units on there, but they could be much smaller units. That would require some finessing and determination in terms of that. These units are, a good size. If you're just wanting to put single detached residential units fronting and facing Canberra Road with individual driveways onto Canberra Road, you could probably get 4 in there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, so it can only be divided longitudinally, that way it couldn't be divided internally with an internal road for more lots that were smaller?
It could, but because it would be on a private condominium road, it would need a rezoning to address some of the condominium elements. And I don't know, I can't say how many that would be off the top of my head.
Okay, perhaps Councillor, staff can provide that.
Yeah.
That number under the, what it might look like if it were something different.
Exactly. I'm just looking to see what the size of the field is that we're playing on.
Okay.
My last question has to do with drainage. We've heard a lot about drainage, and I think that's a pretty serious issue in that lot as it is elsewhere. And I know we're not at the design stage for drainage, but I'm just wondering whether someone might speak to us about the kinds of opportunities there are for different ways of draining that property in order to minimize flooding on neighbors or erosion into the easement at the back, that sort of thing. I know that, in fact, I will say that I know the work of this developer in another development where some really imaginative, at least to my mind, imaginative work went into controlled drainage, and it was done very effectively. So I know that there are things that can be done. I just wonder what is planned to control the drainage in this particular development.
Ms. Weens, are you able to answer that, or shall I go to Mr. Rowe?
I would defer to Mr. Schooley, the engineer on this. I'm sure this is something he's already at least looked at in a very preliminary basis in terms of how to manage the grading and drainage on this property.
Mr. Schooley, if you don't mind, another agent of the applicant.
Good evening, committee. Jason Schooley from Epic Consultants. We've done some preliminary review of the grading and design on the property, and it shows that the units that would be backing onto the houses along Oak Ridge would be relatively level type units where they're the same in the front and those in the back. There's no design to raise them any higher than the existing ground at the backs. In terms of drainage, we'll be collecting with a swale along those properties to make sure that none of the water from this development drains onto the Oak Ridge properties, that none of the development will drain onto the westerly property. And then what we'll be doing is we're going to be collecting the water into a storm sewer system, storing it underground in underground chambers, pre-treating it prior to doing any storage, that type of thing, so to ensure that there's no oils or anything in that storage system or any debris so that it doesn't get plugged up. And we'll be discharging it to the same rate as it's leaving now down into the valley onto the easement lands. And we'll be out getting a permit from the Conservation Authority to do the works on those valley lands through the process. So in essence, our design is to not change any or impact anything downstream or any of the adjacent landowners.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. So what I think I'm hearing you saying is that you'll be collecting water along the perimeter of the property, gathering it through inlets into an underground cistern of...
Yeah, it's more or less, but it's more like underground pipes. We'd be storing it in pipes, possibly, or some type of underground storage. There's many objectives of what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to control the peak flow of water going out, so that we'll be cleaning the water beforehand, before doing any of the storage, so that the storage is maintained there for years to come on, with very minimal maintenance required. And in addition, the storage system will also help with the infiltration of the water into the aquifer below. And as we're cleaning it before we introduce it into these chambers, then therefore we're introducing cleaner water into the aquifer and drainage systems.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just for clarification. So the swaling that will occur will be along the perimeter of the property and therefore in the common area, and it will be the responsibility of the condominium to maintain those swales to ensure that water doesn't leave on the surface onto anybody else's property or into the
They'll be really essentially out of the control of each individual owner, and it'll be the responsibility of the whole condominium corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those were my questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other councilors? Councilor Lane, did you have anything?
No, I'm still thinking.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of things. I look forward to getting that calculation number that Councillor Rivyak was speaking about in terms of the density and the number of units. Ms. Weens, you spoke about the size of the units and that they were, I don't know, you said they were a certain size, units of a certain size. Do we know the square footage of those units or approximate square footage of those units? The range?
I'm going to have to defer to the applicant on that off the top of my head. I don't know. I just know that they are a good size.
Okay. Mr. Rowe, are you able to furnish us with that information, or?
They're going to be approximately between 17 to 1900 square feet at this time.
Okay. Thank you. So that you're still formulating, but that's the range.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. There was some discussion about fencing. I believe it was first done by Mr. Gibson and then by Ms. Baudouin, both at the south and also on the eastern side especially. Are you able to help us, Ms. Weens, with fencing? Because it does appear that there's a difference, although I still want to understand that maybe from Mr. Schooley, a difference in topography there.
So there will be fencing required along the top of slope of the ravine.
Okay.
So that fencing will be put in, and then along the
So that's on the south side that Ms.
south side, and then
Baudouin.
all along the east and west side, there is also fencing proposed to be installed so that the height of the fencing would meet the requirements of our fence bylaw.
And that's 6 feet, is that, or roughly 6 feet?
6 feet, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schooley, I just want to understand the difference in topography, the height difference between the lots. So when a member of the public came forward, they talked about and showed pictures or drawings of a difference in height into the backyards.
The first
But
drawings
you
which
said
had-
something different, so can you just help us out here?
So what we're proposing is that the drawings were a little bit out of scale, as he did mention, they weren't perfect. But in
Okay.
terms of, he had the right dimensions for where we were from the property line, but not where his house was from the property line.
Okay.
Because there's a greater setback, the houses are back probably 40 feet or less.
Okay.
But more in 40-foot range. They're very long lots, and houses are set close, moved up close to the road on Oak Ridge. So in terms of the grading perspective, when we did a preliminary design right now, what we found is that we can put in a proper slope road coming off Camborough Road down to the T shape that's the bottom, where the road and the backyards is the same elevation at the property line. Okay? Because in order to put those lots in 21 years ago, they cut into the existing ground of their backyards to make it so that they had a flat backyard kind of situation.
Oh, I see, okay.
That's what the cut is that he was showing.
Okay.
It varied from 12 inches to 60 inches, going from Camborough Road to the south limit. So what we're proposing to do is keep those houses at the same level as the existing ground at the back. Generally how he demonstrated it in his sketches.
So you're keeping at the, whatever's there currently, you're keeping it?
Whatever's there, it will be almost exactly the same as the back of the units.
Okay. But you also indicated there'll be a swale in the common area, let's say, between
And
those
so
lots and the,
along that buffer of, well, common area we'll call it, there will be a swale that will drain from the house and collect the water so it doesn't breach over and go into the neighbor's yard. We're not using the neighbor's yards as drainage outlets anywhere along here.
okay. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
So,
And Ms. Weens, that will be dealt with how? Is it dealt with this plan of condominium, or is it dealt with the site plan?
The conditions of draft plan of condominium will require the servicing plans to be prepared, and that's usually done at the site plan stage.
Okay.
And that's when we get the detailed engineering design, and that's reviewed again by town staff. It'll be reviewed with Conservation Authority staff as well. Permits will be required from the Conservation Authority staff for the outlet into the drain.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if you might be able to put the final slide there, just so that people have that contact information. Councillor Durley asked that perhaps residents consider submitting additional information on a question that he had asked. Just so that folks, whoops, there we go, thank you. So that's all the input from committee members that I'm seeing. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So now what we'll be doing is we'll be receiving the report, officially receiving it, but we're not making any decisions tonight. We're directing staff, and this is what the motion is, to prepare a report with all the information, and it says for our consideration at a future meeting. And then we'll also be receiving any public comments that we've received. So those are the next two motions. So it has been moved by Councillor Durley that Committee of the Whole receive the Development of Community Planning and Development report, the Department of Community Planning and Development report for information as it pertains to file numbers AM0218 and 26CD 1902-018 regarding 190 Canberra Road, and that committee direct planning staff to prepare a recommendation report on these applications for consideration. So again, we're not accepting or not, it's just saying now draft your report based on what we heard this evening. Any questions or comments from councillors? Then I'm going to call the question. All those, I'm sorry, Councillor Ribiak.
The issues that we discussed will be in that report? The ones, the answers that we wanted?
Ms. Weens?
Yes, they will be.
Okay, great, thank you. As will responses, maybe outline what will be in that report, Ms. Weens.
The report will certainly summarize the public comments that we've heard, responses to those public comments, also address the questions that Councillor Ribiak and yourself had with regards to what would be the number of units that could be fit on that site if we met the RM1 zone standards and or if we met the standards for single detached residential uses.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. If there are other parts of, well, let me put it this way. I'll read the motion and then I'll say what I was going to say. Moved by Councillor King that committee receive the presentation and information provided by Mr. B. Gibson regarding 190 Canberra Road for information, and the presentation be referred to staff for consideration in preparation of the recommendation report. We don't have any written submissions, but that's why I encourage this last slide to be put up. If there are any written submissions that members of the public would like to make, I saw a member of the public shooting up his hand. Maybe just type that out, please, and send it to us, or drop it off here at Town Hall during regular business hours. Please do so, okay? There might be something that you think of out of this meeting. Unless there's no comments or questions, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thanks. And that concludes that public meeting. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate your involvement, and those that are here for the next public meeting, we appreciate, and the one after that, we appreciate your patience. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Video will be posted hopefully by the end of the week, so if you want to re-watch yourself, please do so. Councillors, are we okay? Do you want to take a break?
I'm ready to go. I'm ready.
2 minutes, please. I just need to get up and...
Ladies and gentlemen, I've had a request from council that we take a 2-minute recess just to stretch one's legs, as it were. So I would ask if we do that. Let's take a 2-minute recess and come back in a couple minutes. Thank you.
I need a bit of Yeah, he's right out.
Stuck to him, but you tried it.
They dried off. For the meeting, I spilled my entire. I was like, I'll better stand up.
Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, staff, we are now returning from our recess. Thank you very much. A little longer than 2 minutes, but thank you for the latitude. Well, now moving on to our second public meeting of the evening, and it's dealing with the plan in the River Estates development at Summersides Boulevard and Port Robinson Road. So I do have some notice requirements that I will read. A zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision has been submitted to permit the use of the property for 38 single detached 28th Street townhouse and 16 block townhouse dwellings and associated road, driveways, parking, and landscaping areas. And this is called the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan subdivision River Estates Phase 2. The Planning Act requires under sections 34 and 51 the council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision. This public meeting has been called to satisfy this requirement. Notice of this meeting was provided by prepaid first-class mail to all persons who are listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 120 meters of the subject property on June 13th, 2018. Notice provided information on the property and the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan subdivision. In addition to providing information, we will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer. There is, just like the previous meeting, an attendance list on the table here to the side, in which we would ask all present to print their name and complete mailing address if you wish to be notified of a decision of council. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the town of Pelham to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Pelham before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. In closing, we stress at this point that no decision has been made on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment or draft plan of subdivision, and therefore any comments received will be taken into account by council in our consideration. We'll now move to an overview of the development. Ms. Weens, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the public. As indicated, this is a public meeting for proposed zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for a proposal that's known as River Estates Phase 2. The proposed plan of subdivision is just west of the previously approved River Estates Phase 1 subdivision in the East Fonthill neighborhood. The lands identified on the aerial attached to the PowerPoint are outlined in red. They are irregularly shaped with frontage on Port Robinson Road and Summersides Boulevard. And as previously indicated, the proposal is for residential development that consists of 38 single detached, 28th Street townhouse units, and 16 block townhouse units that would be subject to a future draft plan of condominium. This is the proposed subdivision plan and its layout, and you can see that the street townhouses, they are along the Summersides Boulevard. They front and face Summersides Boulevard and will have a rear lane for vehicular access. The proposed single detached dwelling units are fronting and facing Street A, and then Block 47, which is along the frontage of Port Robinson Road, and Street B is where the 16-unit block of condominium townhouse units would be. They would receive their access off of Street B. Again, from a policy perspective, the property is within the settlement area as identified in the provincial policy statement. This is the area where, again, provincial policy directs us to focus growth and development to settlement areas with the goal of achieving complete communities. The Greenbelt Plan and the Niagara Escarpment Plan do not apply to these lands as they are within the urban area and outside of the Niagara Escarpment Plan area. With respect to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the lands are again within the built-up area, and as is consistent with the provincial policy statement, the built-up area is also the area that is to be the focus of growth and development, with the goal of completing or with the goal of complete communities. The regional official plan designates lands as built-up area and designated greenfield area. The built-up areas where existing development exists and where intensification is directed, and the designated greenfield area is that area where we're to achieve our greenfield targets of density for new development. In the town's official plan, the lands have a variety of land use designations on them. They are designated low density, medium density residential, and there's a sliver of the land that is designated public parkland, and it's also within the area that has the presence of the highly vulnerable aquifer. Low density residential does permit single detached residential units, accessory apartments, and it permits medium density residential units up to a maximum of 60% of the units in any plan of subdivision. The medium density permits townhouse units, small apartments, live-work units, again, accessory apartments, and also would permit low density, but only a maximum being 15% in any plan of subdivision. And the public parkland designation would permit parkettes and open space and parkland type uses. So the zoning, the lands are currently in an agricultural A zone, and the proposal is to zone the lands to a site-specific residential R2 zone and a residential multiple 1 zone to allow the single detached street and block townhouse dwellings. And again, you can see the outline of the property in red. This chart provides the comparison of the current R2 zoning and the proposed changes to the R2 zoning that are being requested by the applicant. These are pretty typical requests and are reflective of, again, part of more contemporary development standards than what our zoning bylaw provides for. Changes from the 87 development standard to a more contemporary development standard. This is the chart with the proposed changes for the residential RM1 zone, and again, the requests for these changes are primarily to achieve proper urban footprint for the residential, the townhouse units, to recognize the buildings being moved closer to the street edge, and to also recognize that access and egress will be from a rear lane for the townhouse units. And again, these are some additional requests for changes. With respect to the public and agency comments, Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority have no objections. They do have some conditions. These are their standard conditions with respect to the stormwater management approval. The Department of Public Works, again, they have requested some revisions to the functional servicing study. They made some comments with respect to the lots fronting on Summersides Boulevard that they should be serviced from the rear lane. However, I do note that when Summersides Boulevard was constructed, the services did go in with laterals on Summersides at that time. So the services do exist within Summersides Boulevard. And then there is also the requirement for the applicant to pay their portion of the cost for the oversizing of the stormwater facility that was constructed in River Estates Phase 1. Fire and bylaw services do not have any comments. Utilities do not have any objections, and Hydro One does not have any comment or concern. Public comments. We received comments from Brenda Deniers. She was concerned where residents would park if Street B does not continue west. She was concerned about the pine trees at the back of her property, wishes to be able to maintain her fruit trees and her garden, and was concerned about a roadway bisecting through her property. And I apologize, this is, there are also comments from planning staff that did not make it on this chart, but there are some comments that planning staff had with respect to this development, and planning staff note that the lots that front onto Street A, the lots we had suggested that those lots are deep enough to accommodate a rear lane along the back of them, and request that there should be consideration for a rear lane along the back of the lots on Street A. So those are in summary, the comments that have been received with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment and the draft plan of subdivision. Again, the development is for 38 single-family dwellings, 28 street townhouses, 16 block townhouses, and the zoning bylaw provides for some site-specific exceptions to proposed development. No recommendation is being proposed, and no decision will be made this evening. And again, following tonight's meeting, if there are any further questions or comments, certainly they can be directed to Shannon LaRocque, the senior planner who has carriage of this file, and or to myself. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Wiens. Do members of council have any questions for the director, Councilor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you for clarification, the planning department's comment with regard to rear lanes on single housing along Street A. Are you talking about both the east side and west side of Street A, or only on the
west side?
On the west side?
The west side of Street A.
And,
yes.
and where would the planning department see access to that rear lane? Off of the rear lane parallel to Summersides?
Yes.
Okay.
Just point, this rear lane would continue to here. One of these units would probably have to be used as a temporary access, or I'm not sure if there's enough area here. The developer also owns this strip of land where it could terminate and come back out onto Street A for temporary use.
Great. So, Mr. Mayor, perhaps when the applicant has his turn, he can explain what the issue is with regard to rear lanes there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Others? There might be other questions, Ms. Wiens, if you don't mind. Councilor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, page 8 of 13 in our presentation, the requested zoning, current R2 zone says maximum lot coverage 50%. Proposed is delete. What is there no limit as to the maximum lot coverage?
The proposal would be, as long as they are maintaining their setbacks, they can provide whatever coverage that they can meet with, as long as they are meeting their setbacks. That's
Proposing the new setbacks that are requested, is that?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Others? Ms. Wiens, couple of questions. So this particular development, or part of it, I think, has that designated greenfield area. So that's the designation that's in the official plan for a higher density. We heard about the built-up area in the other one. This one's greenfield, so it has a higher density. Is that correct?
So within the designated greenfield area, we are to achieve densities of 50 persons per hectare. And you will recall that in the secondary plan that was approved for the East Fonthill neighborhood, there were various neighborhoods that were identified, and the densities within those neighborhoods range between, I think, 48 and 54 persons per hectare, and this proposal would meet the density requirements consistent with what was in our official plan, and then therefore achieve the overall density of 50 persons per hectare across the East Fonthill neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. There was a public presentation last meeting, but it's here as well, and I think it's in the next one. This presence of a highly vulnerable aquifer. What does that mean in English?
So it means that the aquifer below ground, the groundwater aquifer, is considered to be highly vulnerable due to its proximity and closeness to the surface. And in the official plan, where you have that presence of the highly vulnerable aquifer, certain land uses are restricted. Those are land uses such as landfill sites, uses that permit either the storage of hazardous waste or chemicals. Those are the kinds of uses that are restricted so that you don't end up with spills and contamination of the groundwater aquifer.
Okay, thank you. And that covers a large portion of the urban area.
It covers the vast majority of the urban area of Fonthill and parts of Fenwick and a good portion of the rural area.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you're able to answer this. It's labeled as Street C, but I recall that council received a letter from an individual that was suggesting that perhaps, given the fact that their family had farmed in that area, that a roadway be named in honor of that. Was that Clegger Lane, I think, is what was suggested? Is that same roadway?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Street C is a street that we have set aside to take on the name of Clegger, whether it's Clegger Road or Clegger Avenue or
Clegger Lane or something like that.
Clegger Lane or something like
Okay.
that. That is the street that we would like to see named. So when the plan of subdivision comes forward for final approval, that would be where we deal with the street naming of the streets.
Okay, thank you. And I asked that question not only for that question, but also I understood that the road was to continue further south. Is that
Yes.
the intention? Although somebody handed us this plan and it appears that there's, across the street, there's some sort of unit there. I don't know if you can answer that or not.
I won't answer what's on the plan, but yes, the
Okay.
intention would be that Street C would connect all the way to Port Robinson Road.
Okay. To Port Robinson, but
Port Robinson.
I thought also further along.
Yes, and it lines up with across the road where we have Saffron Meadows Phase 2 being proposed. It will line up with that and
Okay,
carry
perfect.
further south.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm sorry, Councillor Papp is here. If you want, you can come up and join colleagues. It's up to you, Councillor. So I know you had a prior engagement. Thank you. And the final question I have, and I appreciate the latitude, just about the rear lanes as well. Can you describe why staff are recommending that, or have put that as a comment when, if I were to look at the area a couple of slides past this one, it appears to be on either side. The orange, I think, is the area for rear lanes. Is that correct? Or does it go into the yellow
medium
area?
density, and there are policies in the medium density designation that provide for rear lanes. And the policies in the official plan speak to this street is considered to be a collector street in the official plan, and it has policies that say council may require rear lanes where you are
Right.
on a collector street. So that street is this Street C.
Okay.
That would be a collector street. We would be wanting to see a rear lane so that these lands could benefit from that rear lane access, and we are also suggesting that these single detached residential units also benefit from the rear lane. The demonstration plan that was prepared as part of the secondary plan process, did show a rear lane in this area.
Okay, I think, yeah, if that could be clarified, okay, I'll leave it at that at the moment.
Sure, we'll hear more about that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Those are all my questions. Now I would invite the applicant to, or the applicant's agent to come forward and state your name and your firm that you work for and help us out here.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, my name is Victor Muratari. I'm with the law firm of Sullivan Mahoney, and I represent River Realty. I'm going to be very brief, Mr. Chairman. Essentially, I don't disagree with almost nothing of Ms. Ween's presentation. The lands in question and the subdivision does encompass both areas that are designated as low density and medium density under the official plan of the municipality. The plan of subdivision incorporates both those designations in one plan of subdivision. It does so in accordance with the provisions of the official plan as to the mix, the maximum mix. Addressing one of the questions you raised, Mr. Mayor, while the property is in the so-called designated built-up area, and while the density requirements under places to grow is different for greenbelt and built-up area, in fact, the proposed plan does incorporate the densities in the same way in accordance with the provisions of the secondary plan. In other words, around 51 units per hectare. So, and of course, we won't talk about 2017 places to grow and what's coming down the pike because everybody's dreading that one, so we'll wait and see what happens. Again, there were a few technical things. Ms. Weens addressed them. The report came out on Friday. Yesterday was a holiday, so there are minor matters in the report. Ms. Weens addressed one of them about the fact that laterals are already built at Summersides to service the street towns that are there. So the report, you wouldn't be building connections in the laneway. There are no questions. There are external cost sharing. There is a property included in the cost sharing that's not ours. Again, these are minor matters that we would straighten out with the planning department before you came to the recommendation report. The one substantive thing that we don't agree with in the planning report is this issue of the rear laneway when it is incorporated to service single-family residential lots for detached dwellings. It simply isn't there in the official plan. Where the recommendations in the development criteria of the official plan calls for a rear laneway, in a collector route, the plan addresses it and conforms. The rear lanes are there in every area where you have multiples that face on to collector roads. As you know, Mr. Mayor, I was involved throughout that period of the secondary plan, including working with the planning partnership in the final version. I simply do not recall there was ever a suggestion that where you do have single detached lots for detached dwellings, there would be a rear laneway. It would be, because the rear laneway, as the guideline criteria, is primarily done to address driveways and parking. The guidelines deal with that specifically for multiple residential development. The guidelines do not deal with it for single-family residential. They deal with garages and driveways in a totally different manner in the built form of the house that's going to be located on that lot. The planning report is correct. According to the minimums, we do have deeper lots on the west side than would be the minimum requirement under the bylaw.
And quite frankly, we are open to discussing it if someone should need a strip of land for that purpose. We just simply think that it's not proper that the developer who's proposing singles be required to build it and provide the access. Within the lands owned by the developer, in this proposed plan of subdivision, the developer is dealing with the lands he actually owns. And he's dealing with it, as he's obliged to do, in accordance with the provisions of the official plan. We believe we comply with every requirement of the official plan in that respect. But we're open to discussion. If someone wants to talk about the question of the laneway because the people to the west may require, we're certainly open to deal with that issue and be glad to deal so with staff. Those are my only comments. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Muratori. Do members of council have any questions for Mr. Muratori?
No.
Councilor Rubyak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I apologize that I'm the dense one here and don't necessarily follow everything that was said. The way this plan is laid out, through you, Mr. Mayor, it shows single-family residences with driveways off the road.
I'm sorry, with
driveways,
yes?
not off a rear laneway, but from the street itself.
Correct.
And I think what you're suggesting is that complies with our plan as we've.
I can take you to the plan if you want.
No need, sir. I trust entirely that what you're saying is truthful as you see it. And it's for that reason that you don't contemplate a need, or not a need, at least don't contemplate a design that would have accesses to those properties from a rear laneway, because it's not required.
Well, it's not only that not required. I mean, most development is driven by planning rationale. So essentially, the estimate that we are getting from the engineering for the creation of these rear laneways, because the rear laneways have to be to urban cross-section. It's going to take plows, it's going to take garbage collecting, et cetera. So the estimate, and you're going to need curb and gutter, they're going to need stormwater sewers, because it's got to take it to stormwater detention ponds. You've got to have lighting, because you can't have these rear laneway not lit. The estimate is going to cost between 50 and 60% of the cost of the roadway in front. Now, there is a rationale for rear laneways when you get to collector roads because of traffic patterns. So you would rather not have the cars backing out of, et cetera, and the rear laneways themselves are safer and a method of getting the cars off the road. But if it's not driven by a particular duplex, that cost of putting in that roadway is going to be borne by every lot that's developed. So they're going to pay for the front roadway and they're going to pay for the rear laneway. It's not a requirement. And quite frankly, had Mr. Palmer at the planning partnership suggested he's going to make it part of the official plan, I think we would have lynched him, quite frankly. It's just not a requirement of single-family lots. Why would we expend that money for that purpose? It just doesn't make any sense.
Councillor, maybe I can help.
Perhaps.
Mr. Muratori also talked about what staff talked about, that they are larger. You can see on this diagram that's here, they're longer, let's say.
Yes.
They're longer lots. And so if you were to go to the orange, the drawing with the orange on it, you'll see that the development along Street C is to be with a rear lane. But the development along the other street, Street A, Mr. Muratori has said it doesn't require a rear lane. So how do you get the rear lane enough room for the rear lane on Street C does one have to have a little bit of a strip behind those lots? I think that's what you're saying. And you were open to discussing if, I don't know what that width is, but if there's a width of land that's required in the back of those lots to help put the rear lane on Street C, the Clegger Street,
If we go
then
back,
then maybe they can talk, but don't, but you think he's saying, don't get the homes on Street A to pay for it. Is that essentially what you're saying?
that's correct. And essentially, if we went back to the land use map that was there, you would see that the land use map shows that proposed Street C as part of the secondary plan. It was intended to be a collector road as part of the secondary plan. That road goes almost through the middle and divides that area designated as medium density, so that you have medium density on each side of the collector road. And that's consistent with the urban guidelines, the urban design guidelines. That's very much there. That was intended. Clearly, that was intended. Now, it was intended on a discretionary basis, where it was needed and where it should be used. But it's never, I never heard the suggestion at any time that you would put a rear lane in single-family lot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment where my difficulty in comprehending this is, and of course it's subject to being clarified as this discussion goes on. If we end up with a rear lane behind the properties that will be fronting onto Road C, that rear laneway will be used by the properties on Street C and be immediately behind the properties on Street A.
Correct.
Correct.
Is that right?
So in effect, you would have a laneway used by half of the residents there, and it would be, at least to my mind at this stage, until I hear something different, reasonable to expect that the houses on both sides of that lane could make use of that laneway, and that would free up Street A to be more the model that we contemplated when we looked at this thing. So that's my difficulty. It doesn't require an answer. I'm just looking at that, and I suspect that as we go through this discussion through this stage to the next stage, we'll have a chance to talk about it some more.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll get a response at some point from Ms. Weems. Are you able to help the councillor? Or
Certainly, the demonstration plan that was prepared as part of the secondary plan shows a laneway in that area, so that the units along Street C would have access to that laneway. It shows that on the other side of that laneway is low-density residential. There is not a policy in the official plan that says that those low-density residential that abut on the other side of the laneway have to or have not, or do not have to have access from that laneway. But the laneway is shown, it's clear that that's the location for the laneway. The rear portion of those strip of residential lots are within the medium density land use designation, and that is where we would anticipate a location of a rear laneway to be located. The question is, if you're going to be putting in a rear laneway, does it make sense for the singles on Street A to also have the benefit of that access, or rear laneway access? And Mr. Muratori is indicating that that's not something that he feels is appropriate. The discussions that were held at the time of the preparation of the secondary plan did not consider that at that time. I can't comment on whether it did or it didn't, but it was clear that the demonstration plan certainly did provide for a rear laneway in that location.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Are there any other questions for Mr. Muratori? It sounds like there's a few technical things that you'll work with staff on, so we appreciate it. Appreciate your presentation. Thank you. Now, members of the public, we'll open it up to members of the public if you'd like to make a presentation to council. Some of you may have already provided written comment to staff for this, but obviously the opportunity for public comment as well. So if any member of the public would like to address council, raise some concerns or issues, now is your time. We'd ask you to come to the podium, give us your name and address, and then provide feedback.
I'm Brenda Daniels, 147 Port Robinson Road, and my concern is the road going through my property, which I've been told that it won't be taken off of, but today I hear the word temporary use of another lane, temporary. What does that mean? Are they still putting that road to my property? I don't know. And the talk about the collector behind me, I don't see how it's going to get through. Like the road he was opposing, that laneway coming through, it's going to be coming down. How is it going to get on down further unless it goes through my property over to Street B or goes on to the collector, which is over there, or goes on to Port Robinson Road. And the other thing was about the park. I can't see why it can't be put back in that area behind the townhouses where the people can, the kids from whatever, that townhouse can use it, where if it's over on the other side, you've got two main roads there. I work in a school and I know what it's like with kids that we're combined roads and that. That's just my concern.
Okay, thank you very much. There might be some questions from council if you're prepared to answer that, if there are any. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Deniers. Appreciate that. And we'll get some answers for you. I think councilors will ask questions of staff when it's their time to get answers for you for that. Other members of the public that might want to make a presentation? Going once? Going twice? 3 times? Thank you very much. Appreciate the public input. Now we'll move to council input, committee input. Let's start off by hearing just a little bit, maybe a staff response, if we might, for the public input that we've received just now from Mrs. Deniers, if you don't mind, Ms. Weens, and explain that what you said earlier about the possibility of a temporary. That's very confusing, perhaps, for folks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do want to clarify, if there is going to be a temporary use of a second means of access to that rear laneway, if that is going to be approved, then that would be on the developer's lands, not on Mrs. Denier's lands.
Okay. Could you point out, maybe this plan is a good spot, could you point out where, and maybe move this sign here, if somebody could move that sign. Thanks so much, Mr. Mestick. Would you be able to point out I know we're only talking about the lands that are in question here, but if
Mrs.
Denier's
Denier's
lands.
owns lands right in here.
Okay, so that area that's marked future road, the edge of that roadway is
That
the edge of her roadway?
is on her property. So her property ends just along here.
Okay.
And the demonstration plan that was, prepared as part of the secondary plan did show this road connecting to this future Street C. This road would only be developed should Mrs. Deniers wish to develop her lands, or if she sold her lands to a developer, it would only be at that time. We understand that Mrs. Deniers does not want to develop her lands. She wants to maintain her lands the way they currently are.
Yeah.
And so this is shown schematically, and I think that's where there's confusion, but it's not part of this development proposal.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. It's council colleagues, it's reminiscent of the Mason Drive situation where there was some lands that were proposed in a development and the property owner did not wish to develop it for a very, very long time. So, and that was fine for that plan. So that type of development has occurred, or I'm thinking of I think it's on Wilson Crossing, is it not, Councillor Durley, where there was a temporary roadway and then eventually a house was there?
Yes, exactly. There was in order to access Wilson from Line Avenue, they used one of the lots to do that. Once Wilson was opened up to Tanner, they closed that lot and they built a house on it. Okay. It was the temporary feature. It was about a year and a half that the roadway was used for access and egress for construction vehicles.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to committee for any input that they have. No. I think the rear lane, if I might, the rear lane issue sounds like it has to be worked on. Would the language allow, for instance, if that rear laneway were to go in there, although the applicant doesn't foresee the possibility of a single-family home using that rear lane. I know of many through the country. For example, I have relatives in Calgary that have a rear lane and they have a single-family home. So there might be, I wondered if the language could be flexible enough so that those building on Street A may want to take advantage of that rear lane as opposed to using Street A. I don't know if that's a possibility or not when it comes to dealing with that, leaving the option open as opposed to forcing it to be built one way. If you have a comment on that?
Mr. Mayor, I mean, it certainly is something that council could consider. I think from the staff perspective, we are looking at a consistent kind of streetscape along Street A. The ability to utilize a rear laneway for rear access for garages would really provide for a good urban streetscape along Street A. It would then allow for one side of the street to have on-street parking and not be interrupted by driveways.
I see.
And particularly if you have second dwelling units and those kind of things within a single detached dwelling, you tend to utilize the on-street parking more readily and frequently. So those are the kind of the benefits of the rear laneway that town staff can see. But certainly this is going to require some further conversation and dialogue. Whether they be given the option that they could utilize the rear laneway should they wish and still have a front-loaded garage. Those are other options that are available. Certainly people that do have a rear laneway access and they have front-loaded garages like to have the rear lane access because that's how they can get into the backyards to do maintenance and repair and install pools or whatever.
Right.
So there's all sorts of reasons to have it, but you know, like I said, from the town's perspective, providing for a strong urban streetscape, we see that as being highly beneficial.
Okay, thank you. One other question, if you don't mind, Ms. Wiens, and that is about the cost sharing. Mr. Muratori spoke about the cost of that roadway. How would that be, or how could that be devised?
Yes, I mean, certainly that laneway would benefit not only this development, but also the adjacent lands. And so there would be, we could foresee a cost sharing requirement, and that when that adjacent lands do come forward for development, we would recover costs from them at that time to share the cost for building and constructing that laneway.
Okay, I appreciate that that information, and no doubt something that council will have to consider. Is there anything further from members of committee? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation and for the answers. So we just have a couple of motions here. It's been moved by Councilor Ribbiak. The committee receives the Department of Community Planning and Development report for information as it pertains to file number 26T19-012018 and AM0318 relating to River Estates Phase 2 Plan of Subdivision, and that committee directs planning staff to prepare the recommendation report on this topic for council's consideration. And similar to earlier this evening, that doesn't say that it's all approved, it's just saying give us a report with the information that we heard from this evening. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. And we have another motion here, and it has been moved by Councillor Lane. The committee received the following submissions, and that is we don't have, I believe it's from Ms. Weens, if you don't mind. I don't know if we need this motion. Do we have something on record from Mrs. Deniers? Do we need a motion for that?
I believe she has,
Out of a preponderance for caution, I'm going to put this in. I'm going to say Brenda Deniers, if that's okay. So it has been moved by Councillor Lane that committee receive the following submissions and refer to staff consideration and preparation of the recommendation report, and that is that submission by Mrs. Deniers. Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. We have another public meeting. Thank you. Thanks for those that were here for the first two. We now move to that next public meeting, and it's regarding an application for zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of condominium at 100 Welland Road. We appreciate all those who have been very patient through this evening, and now you know how this operates. So it is regarding file number AM0518, 26CD19-03018. It's a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the rezoning of a subject land from RM1H, which is residential 1 multiple holding, to site-specific RM1 residential multiple 1 and draft plan of condominium for the development of 14 dwelling units, 10 townhouses, and 4 semi-detached. Planning Act requires under Section 3412 and Section 50, the council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public of the proposed amendment to a zoning bylaw and draft plan of condominium. This public meeting has been called to satisfy these requirements. Notice of this meeting was provided by prepaid first-class mail to all persons who are listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 120 meters of the subject property on June 12th, 2018. The notice provided information on the property and the proposed amendment to the town's zoning bylaw. In addition to providing information on the applications, we'll also receive any comments that any member of the public may wish to offer. There is an attendance list on the table over here to the side, which we would ask all present to clearly print their name and complete mailing address for the application if they wish to be notified of decision by council. If a person or public body would otherwise have the ability to appeal a decision of the town of Pelham or to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting, which is now, or make written submissions to the town of Pelham before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. In closing, we stress at this point no decision has been made on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment or draft plan of condominium, and therefore any comments received will be taken into account by council in their consideration. We now have a presentation by planning staff. If you wouldn't mind proceeding, go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, council and the gallery. My name is Curtis Thompson. I'm a planner with the town of Pelham. So the application, as you just described, is to rezone the lands that are remnant from 1022 Pelham Street, which was recently severed. These lands contain a gas station and a convenience store. So the lands are currently zoned residential multiple 1 with a holding provision on the property for the purposes of ensuring emergency access easement is granted in favor of the subject lands on the adjacent lands that contain the gas station. So the application is to rezone the lands to a site-specific residential multiple 1, which would include lifting the holding provision as well as instituting some performance standards to the regulations for things like setback. And there's also an application for draft plan of condominium. Because this would be under condominium ownership, there would be a private road coming onto the property. And that's how the ownership and tenure would be set up, with common elements being things such as the laneway. This is the proposed site plan. It consists of 14 dwelling units, 10 of which would be townhouses, and 4 would be semi-detached. The semi-detached would front Welland Road, utilizing a rear lane, and the townhouses further inland would, half of which would be front-loaded, the other half would also take advantage of the rear lane with some visitor spaces in front of them. This is a elevation rendering showing what the typical semi-detached unit would look like fronting Welland Road. And this is the draft plan of condominium showing how the common elements would be illustrated versus the individual units. In terms of planning policy, under the provincial policy statement, these lands would fall within a settlement area. Because of this, plans such as the Greenbelt Plan and the Niagara Escarpment Plan are not applicable. The provincial policy statement has a lot of language on building complete communities, diversifying land uses, having a mix of uses, compatibility with the neighborhood, and general intensification that's sensitive to the neighborhoods. The growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe also has this within a designated greenfield area, being within a settlement area, and has further language and direction on land use development and intensification and how that can be appropriately done. Stepping down a level, we've got the Niagara Region Official Plan, which in honor of the greenfield designation at the provincial level has mapped it as a designated greenfield area. And that was because the 1022 Pelham Street, the property before, never had any development on it, thus the greenfield designation, which means that it falls under certain policies, as opposed to what is shown here in gray, which has existing development and would be considered built up. At the Pelham Official Plan, these lands were recently redesignated to the urban living area / built boundary designation with a greenfield overlay. In this designation, a variety of residential land uses are permitted: single, semis, towns, multiplexes like triplexes, fourplexes, subject to the zoning, apartment buildings. This is what the zoning schedule currently looks like. So in this zoning amendment, the use isn't changing so much as the zoning amendment is to lift the hold and to amend some of the performance standards. So in the upper left-hand corner, these are the existing permitted uses within the RM1 designation, or RM1 zone, sorry. This is a matrix just showing what our default RM1 zone provisions are in the center column, and the proposed regulations in the far right column, adjusting something such as front and side yard setbacks, planting strips, and much of about half or so are not proposed to change at all. The application was circulated to agencies and the public within 120 meters. At the time of this report and presentation, I didn't receive any comments from the public. I know some came in afterwards. Comments from the region of Niagara, there are various condo agreement clauses. They did want confirmation that an easement over 1022 Pelham Street in favor of the subject lands can be implemented for the regional waste collection trucks to circulate, in lieu of private collection as an alternative. The town's fire department was commenting on the width of the internal laneway. They require it to be 6 meters clear width from the inside of curb to the inside of curb, with the addition of curbs on the outside that can be mountable, and the entire internal road would be designated as a fire route. The Public Works Department had various condominium agreement clauses, and there were some typos and some minor correction on the functional servicing report. They also noted that sump pumps installed in the rear southernmost townhouse lots would be required to drain northwards towards Welland Road. All the utility agencies had standard agreement clauses. And that concludes my presentation, and any future correspondence from the public can be funneled through me. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Thompson, for your presentation. Do members of council have any questions? Councilor Rabiak.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through you, just for clarification. So the emergency access that's really under discussion here is where the easternmost leg, right there?
The easement?
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is 1022 Pelham Street.
Right.
So the easement traverses this property. Now, town staff, we haven't seen the easement documents from 1022 Pelham Street. My understanding is that it's been completed, so we wouldn't be in a position at the moment to recommend lifting the hold until we've seen evidence of that. And that's been a long time coming. Like, this was all first deliberated back when the land was originally developed in the commercial stage.
Okay.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Mayor, even though there's a solid line or a continuation of the line through there, that's actually meant to be open. There's no fence, there's no gate, it's just an open access into the property next to it.
Hasn't really been discussed too much at the moment. The reason being, in some other jurisdictions, if it's just a fire route, sometimes a barricade will get put up, which would have to be removed at the time of an emergency. But the region, having the region chime in about having the garbage collection would, in that case, necessitate that it be left open, and therefore also for cars as well.
I see. So again, through you, Mr. Mayor, so that's all going to be addressed in the final report. We'll see it at that time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thanks. Others? Just some clarity on that fire. Are you saying that the entire roadway is to be a fire lane? All of the common, is that what you're saying? Or the fire chief saying?
The where the cursor's going over?
Yes.
The fire chief's comment wouldn't include the lane, my understanding. It would just be
All of that is to be a fire lane, is that correct?
needed fire route.
What's that mean? There's no parking allowed, is that?
It becomes enforceable by law, and they would put signs up, like the fire route signs, and it can be cars can be ticketed if they're infraction.
Okay.
No parking.
No parking.
No parking, that's what,
Sorry.
okay. All right, thank you. We'll probably come back to that later. So, okay, thank you. Anything further from council? Thank you. Now to the applicant's agent, who's been very patient.
I don't know which one.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and any neighbors who may be in attendance. Dan Romanko. I'm a planner with Better Neighborhoods, and I'll try and avoid some redundancies with staff's presentation. Where am I going here? Slideshow.
I don't think so.
There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Michael.
As you can see, we're proposing 14 units, 10 of which are townhouses and 4 are semis. The semis are fronting Welland Road, and you can see by way of a rear lane use there, we have no garages or driveways fronting Welland. The townhouses behind those also benefit from the rear lane, and those are modest homes, about 1,600 square feet, two-story. The Welland ones, the semis, are approximately 1,700 square feet in that order. We have a more conventional product at the south end, which is approximately 1,750 square feet, front-loaded garages with porches that come in front of the garage to diminish the presence of automobiles. There is a connection that was just described. You can see a little bit clearer here to the bottom of the slide, which is that easement across the neighboring property for fire access or emergency vehicle access. And we're providing 8 visitor parking spaces just along that roadway there. There's also an additional walkway connection up through to the south of the property there at the, I guess, the west end of the site, which will connect up to Harold Black Park for recreational use for residents there. We've taken a very careful approach to designing this site. Even though it's sort of a greenfield site, it really is an infill situation. We have the commercial gas bar, which I understand is a bit of a concern for some of the residents in the neighborhood, on the one end, and we have single-family amenity spaces on the west side. So we configure the road to provide as much of a buffer to those rear yards as possible, including a 1.5 meter landscape strip there. And we think we've got a pretty good plan that works as a transitional use between the commercial component on the corner to the low density residential use further west. So I won't be too redundant here, but we're essentially using good urban design techniques, which I've already indicated. And we only, as staff have pointed out, only require variances to the zoning bylaw. Much of the benefit of the condominium tenure provides that the private roads and all the maintenance and costs are borne by the residents. And as a result, we usually benefit from development standards that are not the same as what the municipality would require. This is a sort of a colored rendering of what the semis would look like from the front. And here's the reverse in the rear, which would be sort of backing onto the, excuse me, the garages. So this brings me to an ask that we have of council, which is to request relief of the development standards, notably 7.1, which is the emergency fire access standard in the the engineering design manual, and that requires a minimum clear width of 6.5 meters, excluding on-street parking widths. Or it says, it goes on to say a minimum travel width of 3.25 shall be provided to the satisfaction of the fire department. What we provided with our road, our internal street, is 6 meters outside curb to outside curb. And our firm does a number of infill projects throughout the region, and the infill sites are very difficult. We're trying to balance a lot of things on the site, the least of which is landscaping and buffering and appropriate setbacks. So although it seems rather minor, 0.5 meters is actually fairly significant in this context. And I'll just back up and explain how we approach things normally. What you see here is an OBC requirement for Part 9 buildings. And it's important to note that these are Part 9 buildings, as are the ones further west, because there's certain parts of the code, Part 9, which applies to those buildings. And what it requires is no more than 90 meters from a hydrant to the base of the building. And the truck can't be more than 45 meters from the hydrant or 45 meters to the face of the building. So that's rather depicted in what we're showing here. I'll note on this one, so just going back here, the 45 meters, the truck is located actually 40 meters from Hunter's Court. There's a hydrant located there, up in this direction. Okay, there's Hunter's Court. So we've placed the fire truck within those 45 meter requirements. And we are prepared to, of course, provide for a fire hydrant internally, and we're proposing the fire route, which is fairly typical and common practice, because the Part 9 part of the code actually is a little vague with regards to fire access routes. So what we found is that many municipalities and their fire departments adopt Part 3 of the code, which is for much larger buildings. And Part 3 of the code says, and I've got the reference here, it says, have a clear width not less than 6 meters unless it can be shown that lesser widths are satisfactory. Now that suggests that lesser widths could be shown or demonstrated to be satisfactory, but here we're running into a situation where your engineering standard is actually more conservative than the OBC. So
OBC, sorry.
The Ontario Building Code.
Thank you.
My apologies. So we've already got an existing fire route across the lands by way of this easement, and the easement is yet to be finalized, but it is with the lawyers currently. And there is a fire hydrant located on that land. And then we've got the existing, or the proposed one at the west end of the site, just opposite the laneway there. Now, let me go back to my comments about the 0.5 meters. While it doesn't seem like a lot, the actual impact to this site is fairly significant. What it means is we reduce our landscape strip from 1.5 to 1 meter, okay, which takes away a really sound opportunity for landscaping that would actually provide a buffer, a meaningful buffer to the residents to the west. Okay, and I mean, if we don't have enough of a container for a big tree, it won't sustain itself. We have to reduce, there's a pinch point where you can see where it says setback. Let me just direct your attention to it. Because we've had to shift this road effectively over to maintain a 12-meter radius for the truck, we've got a pinch point here where we had 1.25 meter setback. Because of the irregularity or the fact that the property lines are not parallel or perpendicular, we now are down to 0.8. So that would either trigger a minor variance for that, which is possible, but the more concerning aspect of that is we could be into some limiting distance issues with regard to the Ontario Building Code, and that would limit window opportunities or openings along that face. So, and then the other minor, relatively minor impact is that this rear yard amenity space is further reduced as well. So there's just a list of some of the impacts. Clearly, we don't recommend more asphalt than is required. We would much rather see landscaping, and I think most residents would as well. And it's not to say that we don't think that fire safety is important. Of course we do. And we would not ever recommend doing anything that would jeopardize the lives and safety of the future residents. But we just feel that in this case, the restrictions are rather onerous, and we would like staff to consider reducing the engineering standard in this regard.
Okay.
That's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Remenko. Questions for members of council? Councilor Rubio?
Thank you, and thanks for that presentation. Along the east edge between the convenience store and the gas bar and this proposed development, what are you looking at putting in there? As by way of a buffer or a protection for the new build, for the infill?
Sorry, you're referring to along this edge here? Well, at the moment, there's an unsightly 8-foot-high board fence.
That's right.
And it wouldn't be our first choice, but it's there. If it's a site plan requirement, then I'm afraid I don't think we have a lot of options.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? You answered the sidewalk. I don't know if this is an odd question. I don't even know if residents would want this. So I'm just asking this out of curiosity. You're putting the road, the condominium road, directly to the west. Did you consider putting it on the eastern side of the property? I don't even know if that's physically possible. But so why did you choose to put it there? Not in the middle, not on the eastern side.
Well, we looked at a number of configurations early on in our preliminary design work, and I think one of the biggest factors of locating where it was to provide separation from those rear neighbors, the rear amenity spaces of the neighbors to the west.
Okay.
There were other options. But this configuration permitted houses to be oriented in a north-south direction.
Okay.
Okay, which thereby also permitted the residents themselves not to have amenities that backed directly onto the gas bar, or vice versa. So
Right. Okay.
this was the configuration that best suited the site, in our opinion, and we were able to provide frontage onto Welland.
I was just wondering, what's trying to understand what went into that thinking, so I appreciate that. Not saying it should be, I'm just wondering. Okay, thank you very much. Those are all my questions, unless council colleagues have anything. I'm sorry, Councillor Lane, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. There was some concern raised by you about the widths of streets and what have you. Was there any thought given to reducing the size of the structures within the confines of the development to give yourself more room rather than go the other way?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, indeed that is an option. We had done some preliminary design work already with the semi-detached homes and felt they were appropriately designed to meet the market requirements. Further shifting that would require, well, not only redesign, but also reducing the floor area of those homes, which, we prefer not to do.
Thank you. Any others? Councillor Durling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I see there's signs where there's going to be the phase 2 of the commercial development beside the gas bar and all that. Is that going to have any impact on this residential?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not familiar with that aspect of the previous development. I've only been charged with looking after this severed lot, but I can't foresee any real impacts to this proposed development.
From the onset, this has been a very controversial development, and people on Michaela have expressed some very serious concerns, and I'm glad to see that most of them are being considered and at least mitigated, and we just want to make sure that the best possible development would be for the existing people on Michaela, and this is my complete interest in this as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was really what drove a lot of the design criteria here, was the neighbor concerns, and we took that to heart when we started the design of this site.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much, Mr. Romanko.
Thank you.
Now we open it up, as we've done in the other situations, to members of the public who've been very patient. Are there any members of the public that would like to present to us? I see M. Downey, you did provide something written to us. Did you want to add to that, or?
Actually, was our letter included in the package? Was it?
It was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an email.
Yes, and then I identified 2 concerns, and when the information package came out, I identified a few more, so I'll just add those on. Let me say I'm not terribly opposed to this development, because I think actually it does a good job of providing as much buffer as possible for the neighbors with the road the way it is, and it also helps buffer the noise and the lights and everything else from the 24-hour gas station. So for me, I think it's a win to get further away from Circle K. But having said that, I do have some concerns, particularly about the density of the development. So I'll try to go through these. Stormwater management. That was discussed earlier in the evening about stormwater management. And because of the density of this and the lack of permeable surfaces, I just want to know if anything has been done to look at stormwater management. The Ministry of Housing or Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing has sent out an info sheet on planning for climate change. So one of the other developments talked about having underground storage pipes or dry wells. So is that being considered for this development? I don't want their water becoming my water.
Right, of course. Maybe we'll get an answer for that after you present.
Okay, so that was one. The fence reserve, or the 1-foot reserve that's owned by the town. What happens to that? Does the town keep that? Does it revert back to the developer? Does the fence change? Because your fence is in that 1-foot strip, and it's about 3.5 inches off the property line. So am I going to be stuck having to pay for a new fence at some point?
Ms. Weens, are you able to answer that right now for Mr. Downey?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, there is a 1-foot reserve along their, what is that, the west property line?
Yes.
And that is owned by the town. We've had that 1 foot reserve, I think, since this Sunshine Estates subdivision was developed.
Well, that's Michaela, is that correct?
Yes, the Michaela Crescent lands. I have spoken with our manager of engineering. At this point in time, that 1 foot reserve could potentially be lifted and be added to these lands if that's something that council could consider. From staff's perspective, we don't see a need to retain that 1 foot reserve necessarily. They are providing, we do own that strip of land to the south, which links up with Harold Black Park. And so there is access provided through this subdivision to those town-owned lands for pedestrian access. So yeah, it is something that we've looked at recently. We haven't come to a final conclusion as to whether or not the town will keep it. We're, at this point in time, we're thinking it doesn't appear to be necessary. I have not yet had a chance to get a title search done to see if there is something registered on title with respect to the purpose of that 1 foot reserve, because there was nothing in the Sunshine Estates subdivision agreement that provided any purpose to that 1 foot reserve. So we do need to finalize that title search to confirm that.
Okay, thank you. So we'll get that information, that can be included. Mr. Downey?
I know it's not in Sunshine Estates because the 1 foot reserve is on the other side.
Yes.
And because I know that their lawyers are trying to figure out what that's in there for. But I'm just concerned that the fence, the chain link fence that's there now, is actually in that 1 foot reserve by 3 inches, and that's the way the town initially insisted it be done, so that it was a town-owned fence, and the neighbors couldn't put gates in and all that other stuff.
I see. So the fence isn't on your property, it's
not on my property.
it's in the town's property.
It's within the town's property.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
So I hope that something can be done so that the fence stays there and doesn't have to be moved 3 inches.
Right. Closer to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
In the Regions report, they talked a lot about garbage pickup and recycling. And one of the things that led to was the need to get access through the fire, the emergency vehicle access. And I attended the committee adjustment when they talked about getting that easement through there. And they were adamant at the time that it was strictly for emergency vehicles. It wasn't going to be opened all the time. It was going to be locked or gated or something else so that it wouldn't become a regular transit route. So now all of a sudden we're talking about having, discussed earlier about garbage trucks driving through there. Maybe it'll just be left open all the time. And that wasn't what I thought we'd agreed to at the Committee of Adjustment. So I like to reinforce my thoughts that should be closed. Either it has to be gated or it has to be locked. It should be something so that it doesn't become a thoroughfare, because then that affects the amount of traffic that's going to be down that road.
I see. So you're worried that somebody pumping gas will go through there to get out?
They do now. Because there was never any intersection improvements done at Pelham and Welland, people cut through the gas station all the time now.
Right.
Because it backs up there in morning, especially mornings, and usually that's the only time it backs up there. But people get tired of waiting, and so they cut through the gas station all the time now.
Okay.
So they'll cut anywhere
Thank you.
that they think they're going to save, a few seconds. The other thing that they talked about was in the Regions report, they talked about, they had a sketch that identified pads where the residents were going to pile their recycling and garbage for pickup. And they gave two options. One was to put on the fence side of lots, or it was 2 Michaela and 8 Michaela. So that's the first street and the second one from the end. And the second proposal was they put it on the east side of the access road. So it'd be on beside the townhouses. And that would be my preferred option, would be that one. I don't want someone's garbage piled up behind my backyard. Well, I'm at 8, I'm at 10. But I'm sure my neighbors don't want garbage piled up behind their houses all day long waiting to be picked up. And a better option to fix that might be if they put the garbage, or if the condo corporation could arrange to have the garbage picked up on garbage day and taken out to Welland Ave. then the trucks don't have to back up. Garbage trucks don't need access through the, that emergency easement.
Okay.
They do it at Ryan's Walk. I've gone by there and like there's 20 green bins and garbage bags all piled up in front on the street on, I think that's Line Ave.
Line Avenue, yes.
So they do, it works over there, so if they're going to have a maintenance company doing work here anyhow, so they can get them just to pick up their garbage and drop it off at Welland Ave, and the garbage truck doesn't have to back up anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
And parking, and I can't tell from the drawing, but does each of these units only have one parking space? They all have two? Okay, so you all have two plus the eight.
Okay, Mr. Downey, yeah, so we
Right.
want to make sure we get this on video.
Sorry.
So you're asking about the parking spaces. The question was, does each unit have
Each
one or
unit,
two?
yes.
Mr. Romenko indicated that they have two. What was your second question? I'm sorry.
Well, because they only have, there's 8 visitor spots for the 14 units they've got in here, so that just doesn't seem enough. But if each unit actually has 2 parking spaces, dedicated parking spaces, and that's probably okay then. Because otherwise, all the overflow parking either goes across to the church, or it goes to Michaela. It's going to end up on Michaela.
Or in the commercial lot, perhaps.
Yeah, and they won't be too keen on that
No.
either. Just like the people in Michaela won't be too keen on it.
Thank you.
And the last thing I had was, you talked earlier about fire protection. And so and it's not clear to me, are they relying on a private fire hydrant in the gas station to be part of their fire protection system?
I think there was also, I don't know, Ms. Weens, can you
There's a
answer
hydrant
that?
on-
There was also a discussion about putting a fire hydrant on this property. Can you answer that question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you, there's a proposal to put a fire hydrant inside this property to meet the distance requirements that are necessary. So, no, there wouldn't be a need to use the fire hydrant in the commercial lands.
Okay.
Okay, I thought that, it's on an earlier sketch, they showed that they're, okay. And the other thing, the last one, and I have no idea whether you can do this, but because of the density of this development, can the town impose restrictions on the condo corporation, like they can't use these for short-term rentals or Airbnbs or any of that kind of stuff?
Not sure. Ms. Weens, are you able to answer that question for Mr. Downey at this point? Or?
The condo corporation could include declarations to that effect, yes.
Okay.
But is that something you guys could ask them to do then?
It is something that the town could ask that be included as part of the condo declarations, yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much,
I think
Mr.
that's
Downey.
mine.
Any questions for Mr. Downey? Thank you so much. We appreciate your feedback. Now, there was an outstanding question, and it was the first one regarding stormwater management, and I thought that was a bit more complicated. So who's able to answer that? Mr. Romenko, are you able to assist regarding the stormwater management, or Ms. Weens? The reluctant Mr. Romenko on that issue. Go ahead. You seem a little reluctant to answer.
Well, I'm a planner.
Still being worked
I'm a
out?
planner.
Not an engineer?
I'm not an engineer. We did provide a functional servicing report to staff for the purposes of these applications. We will be entering into a site plan stage, in which case we will be providing more detailed stormwater management, grading and servicing design to staff. Much of that work's already been done, and all of that work will be done to meet engineering standards, town engineering standards.
Okay, great. We'll look forward to that. Thank you. Is there something to add to that, Ms. Weens?
Yes, and if I could add to that.
Thank you.
Certainly, the town would require that the stormwater be managed on-site. There wouldn't be the ability to direct flows onto adjacent properties or anything like that. So we're looking at, there is a storm sewer on Welland Road, that the stormwater would be directed to connect to the storm system on Welland Road.
Okay, thank you.
And there would be a series of, underground pipes to do that.
So there wouldn't be, it wouldn't have the same situation that we talked about before at a previous, because it's not being put out into the environment, it would be going into a system, so there wouldn't be that requirement for containment and cleaning and all those things.
There might be the requirement to have some on-site storage, and that would likely be in the storm sewer pipe.
Okay.
to store some of the water. And again, the same principles of rate of flow would be applying, but to get it into the storm sewer on Welland Road that ultimately outlets further downstream.
The system.
into
Okay,
the
thank
system,
you.
yeah.
Councillor Ribbiak, you had a question regarding that matter?
In a kind of a way, yes, it has to do with the storage of liquid, but it's slightly different.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you to hold that.
I will.
Because we are at the point where we're receiving public comment. So we heard from Mr. Downey. Are there any other members of the public that would like to present? No? Some smiling people back there, but they're not going to present. Okay. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, thank you very much. So now we move to committee input. Councilor Ribbiak.
Thank you. Listening to all this, a couple of thoughts occurred to me that I hadn't asked earlier, and I apologize for that. One of those has to do with not water, but snow. There's precious little room in there for snow to be stored, and there's also, I guess, precious little room either for garbage to be put in bins if the decision is to go with private pickup as opposed to public pickup, which I think is why the issue of public pickup came up. So I don't know whether that requires an answer. I'm just pointing those two out as observations, and I would hope that in the final site plan,
right,
some thought might be given to where those two issues might be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wiens, those are site plan matters, is that correct? Are you able to assist the councillor now, or is that?
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, those are primarily site plan considerations, and the issue with respect to garbage will be something that we will have to deal with either as a draft plan of the condominium agreement in terms of whether or not they will proceed with regional garbage pickup or whether it will be private garbage pickup.
Okay, thank you.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, any other matters? Yes, no, yes. Councillor Papp?
Just very quickly, sorry I was late. Comment. I'm still trying to figure out why you guys have gone with 2 stories buildings, considering that the demand that we've known in the market is 1-story bungalows. And secondly, am I to understand that each of these units, this 1,400 feet, we're looking at 800 square feet on each floor? Is that correct?
Mr. Romanko, are you able to assist the councillor? Maybe, would you mind just coming up here so it's recorded on video, if you don't mind?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there are approximately 800 square feet per floor. The smaller towns, which you see in the middle, are, they're 800, 850, some of the larger ones.
Okay.
2 stories.
No, just knowing what I've seen over the years with some of these units, then also the potential to finish off basements, right? So looking at potentially 2,400 square feet of living space. I live in one. I just watching to see what kind of the market we're trying to attract here and what we are having. So I'll leave it at that, and I will wait for site plan. Same thing with the snow and the garbage storage. I'm just trying to think of how that works. And finally, just what Councilor Joey is saying, this is very controversial, and I do want us to pay close attention to what will happen to phase 2 of the commercial development, because I vaguely remember serious site plan variations being shown. I don't want to get into that tonight, but I want to make sure that it doesn't somehow delineate from what you guys are trying to do there. I support it. I'm glad it's happening. I just don't want anything else that's going to encroach on it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? A couple of quick things. I think the public, Mr. Downey, when he presented earlier, talked a little bit, alluded to this. I'm pleased that, it was how many years ago now, but council worked together with the developer of the gas station to move that site. So initially it was to be, the gas station would be right up against the properties on Michaela, and it was turned And, this is the result, and I think the vision was that there'd be some sort of infill in this area that would be that buffer between existing development that had been there for a number of years on Michaela, and then the newer commercial development that had been, I'll say, guaranteed really back in the official plan and through Ontario Municipal Board, et cetera. So, I see this as a win in terms of it being a development that buffers between the two. And I understand why the roadway is the way it is, et cetera, and to be that buffer. I see the product that's being offered, Councillor Papp, is a bit more of a different range of housing type. The lot isn't there that some of the lots and other townhouses in the area have, but I think this is a product that would give that full range, and could be that's what we always look for in planning that comes forward to us. The 1 foot reserve sounds like there might be a solution there somehow. I look forward to hearing a little bit about the waste vehicles. I think, colleagues, in my opinion, if I can give my opinion, the applicant makes a compelling case on the road width in terms of having a greater good development as opposed to something that there's a lot of tarmac, and I think given the fact that it's a fire lane, the entire thing, and there'll be no parking in that area, and I hopefully that's strictly enforced, provides to me a compelling case, I think, for the narrower width on that. So we'll see what happens when that comes back, and we'll have that debate when that comes to us. I was kind of hoping the fire chief would be here, so we might hear a little bit more, but perhaps that can be written in. I think that answers all of the concerns that I've had, so I look forward to it. Councillor Durley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important to note, and perhaps in closing, that higher densities are required by the new provincial policy statement. It's not a matter of this is what we want to do, this is what we're compelled to do. The provinces give us this directive, and we need to follow it. We cannot vary from it, and that's all three cases that we talked about this evening had much higher densities than some of the areas around beside it. This is the reason for it. We're trying to make it as nice as possible to fit in as much as possible, but it's not going to completely fit in because the day of the half-acre estate single family is gone. We're not going to do that again. We're never going to have that again because it's, again, the statements that have come down to us, this is what we need to follow. So the development committee is doing a great job in trying to make it look as good as possible, and we're doing our best to put in architectural guidelines that make it suitable and look nice for the neighborhood and make sure that there's no negative impact on that. We're doing our best. The development community is helping us out a lot. This is a great partnership, and like I say, we'll just continue to do the best that we can.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Anyone else? Do you want to say, just echo that and underscore and thank the applicant and his agents for, his or her agents for putting it all together and making it, having that vision in terms of it being walkable and a better neighborhood as was outlined, so thank you. So I do have a motion moved by Councillor Durley. The committee receives the Department of Community Planning and Development report for information as pertains to application file number AM0518 and 26CD19-03018 100 Welland Road, and the committee direct planning staff to prepare a recommendation report on both the rezoning and draft plan of condominium applications for consideration. Any further comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. It has been moved by Councillor King that committee receive the information submitted by Mr. M. Downey relating to the development application, 100 Welland Road, and that the information be forwarded to staff for consideration during preparation of a recommendation report for consideration by council. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. that concludes that particular planning meeting, and it has been moved by Councilor Ribbiak, the special meeting of Committee of the Whole, public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned until the next public meeting scheduled for August 7th, 2018. I do want to thank Ms. Wilford for being the clerk at this meeting. It's her first time as deputy clerk, and she's clerking, and she's done a great job. So thank you very much for that, Ms. Wilford. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Who's this?